Azur Lane. A while back, I mentioned that the game needed a story as it was missing so much when I started playing it. Well, fast forward 3 years later and do I have that same stance? No. 3 years is a lot of time, and a lot of things can change. After so many events, so many characters being introduced and added, there is a lot to this game for sure. But one thing that surprises me is how much has changed story-wise in those 3 years. Now, to be fair, Azur Lane's story can be a little bit difficult to follow. There are a lot of events, so where does one start? Of course, it gets a lot harder if one has missed an event, and even more so if that event has not had a rerun yet or isn't archived. However, today, I think marks a new day for Azur Lane. So gather around, everyone, because today, I'm going to tell you a story. A story about Azur Lane. Azur Lane's story starts in a world much like our own. Humanity has the desire to explore and conquer the open waters of their world, to see everything their home has to offer, and of course, settle and find resources to continue on their road to discovery. Over time, major powers take control of regions and the resources they have. Their population grows, and with it, the need for more resources. And with that need, war breaks out among the powers. So far, the world remains much like our own. But on one fateful day, a new threat would emerge and change the course of history for the world forever. And that enemy would be known as the Sirens. The world was not prepared for the threat the Sirens gave, and lost a lot during their initial invasion. Each major power did their best to hold off the threat, but still suffered heavy losses in both war and their everyday life. In their darkest hours, the powers realized that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and as such an alliance was formed. The nations of Eagle Union, Royal Navy, Sakura Empire, Dragon Empery, Northern Parliament, Iris Orthodoxy, Sardinian Empire, and even later, Ironblood, came to create the alliance called Azur Lane. With Azur Lane, humanity began to turn the tide of war against the Sirens and push them back. Their momentum was strong, but further research and development into a new weapon was what made a huge impact in their first war with the Sirens. Kinetic Artifactual, Navy, Self-Regulative, N-Lore Node, or Consent, were created. These are the Shipgirls that we are familiar with on an everyday note now. But back then, each faction began to fight using the Consent, and push back the Sirens to the best of their abilities. With enough time and resources spent, humanity was able to achieve victory against the Sirens and create another era of peace. However, it was not the last time humanity would have to deal with the Sirens. Despite winning the war, humanity continued to practice and prepare for the next one, be it with Sirens or a rival nation. We see this with the Sakura Empire and their event Crimson Echoes. Each year, they hold an annual naval exercise to show the might of the Sakura Empire fleet. However, this naval exercise was different this year. The Sakura Empire's flagship of the combined fleet, Nagato, had taken the role of referee. As a result, she has attached a prize for the winner of this particular exercise game. The winner would succeed Nagato and become the next flagship of the combined fleet. They would become the Sakura Empire's third flagship and leader of the naval forces, much like Nagato was when she succeeded Mikasa. It is here when we meet the first group of important characters of the Sakura Empire's lore, Kaga, and the sister ships Akagi and Amagi. Both Amagi and Kaga fight well in the naval exercises, but Amagi comes out on top against Kaga. With that result, Amagi is named the next flagship to be and will succeed Nagato when the time comes. After this announcement, Nagato lets the Sakura Empire know of a new agreement that has been agreed upon with all of the major factions. This agreement comes with the tough decision of choosing a small number of battleships to be converted to aircraft carriers, while the rest were to be scrapped. Samagi did win the original games. She and her sister Akagi will be the two converted to aircraft carriers. Kaga, unfortunately, was destined to be scrapped. Due to some circumstances with Amagi's poor health and weak wisdom cube, Nagato decides to host a second naval exercise as per Amagi's request. The title of flagship is also on the line again with this particular game. This time, however, Kaga does win this round, and learns what Amagi had planned for this. She wanted to test Kaga to see if she can really lead and fight. With how Kaga has performed, she is comfortable with Kaga being the flagship. With this title, Akagi and Kaga will now become carriers as the age of the aircraft carrier approaches, of which Amagi says, "And when the time comes, you and Akagi will form the foundation for the Sakura Empire's future." With this, the Sakura Empire is somewhat ready for the new age of military combat. However, will they be ready for what the future really has in store for Akagi and Kaga? Only time will tell. As time goes on, it seems a difference in ideology really begins to set in. The Alliance Azur Lane believes in the purity of natural evolution, freedom, and peace. Part of that natural evolution concept of Azur Lane is the complete ban of any utilization of Siren technologies. It is this aspect of the ideology that causes some rift between some of the members of the Alliance. Ironblood has long since been big into Siren technology. They were always curious about whatever tech they could scrap and research. This heavy interest and limits by the Alliance put a nasty wedge between Azur Lane and the Ironblood. It is very likely that this difference in ideology aided in Ironblood making the decision to leave Azur Lane. The Sakura Empire also left Azur Lane as well. They are a faction of magic and enchantments, which may have also been slightly affected by that similar wedge due to the restrictions. There is also some speculation that the Sirens may have had their hand in the split as well, especially with how they act throughout the timeline. At the very least, it should be mentioned that the actual reason behind the separation of Ironblood and Sakura Empire from the Azur Lane Alliance remains unknown. But it is here that both the Sakura Empire and Ironblood come together to form the Crimson Axis. Over time, more factions join the Crimson Axis, giving us the following roster. Azur Lane still had Eagle Union, Royal Navy, Northern Parliament, Dragon Empery, and the Iris Libre subfaction of the Iris Orthodoxy. The Crimson Axis gained allies over time, giving them the Ironblood, Sakura Empire, Sardinian Empire, and the Vichya Dominion subfaction of the Iris Orthodoxy. The ideological differences and desires of both factions eventually led to actual conflicts occurring between both of the groups. This causes the world to return to an older state of conflict that it had once known. The only difference was that the Sirens still lurked about the world, watching their every move. These conflicts were later dubbed as reenactments, and it did not take long before the first one ignited the Crimson Axis Azur Lane War, of which, this actually does bring me to a point that I want to make. The next handful of reenactments that I'm about to cover really don't bring much to the overall impact of the actual story that we'll be talking about here. Personally, I think it's better if we were just being very concise with covering them here and what? Is the video too serious? Alright. We'll throw in some jokes here just for this little bit, so we'll have a nice little lightning round here. Anyway, let's look into it. The pursuit of Graf Spee. Spee didn't make it. Stars of the Shimmering Fjord. Hunter and Hardy try to go in sneaky beaky like, fail, and Hunter almost doesn't make it. Counterattack within the fjord. Eskimo ends up fighting a whole bunch of destroyers. I'd like to say that she lost, but she's actually an isekai protagonist with a plot armor. Glorious battle. Glorious turns into Arc Royal thanks to Ardent Nakasta, but because there can only be one Arc Royal, she sacrifices herself to protect a convoy. There is only ever one Arc Royal. I don't know if that counts. Iris of Light and Dark Part 1. Now, I should mention that Part 1 is only the first 4 chapters of the event. That's all. Anyway, after a scuffle between Dunkirk and the Royal Navy, there are now 2 sides to the Iris Orthodoxy. Those that do not like what the Ironblood are doing, and Dunkirk simps. Okay, fine. Those who that won't forgive the Royal Navy for what they did to Dunkirk and a few other shipgirls. Imperial Tragicomedy. The Royal Navy offered to help the Sardinians rid the Mediterranean of Sirens, but craft a backup plan in case they betray the Royal Navy. Guess what happens next? They betrayed the Royal Navy and fail horribly. The rest of the event is spent with the Sardinians doing damage control, while the Ironblood laughs at them and stops helping them. The Sardinians question their allegiance to the Crimson Axis. but don't do anything about it afterwards. Also, Carabinieri learns what happens when you call a girl heavy. The Enigma and the Shark. The local bulb of garlic is called Shark. Wait, that can't be right. Also... Okay, and that's about all of them. Those are the ones that don't have any major significance to the storyline. I mean, they are battles that occur in the rowboat area between the Royal Navy, Ironblood, Irish Orthodoxy, and the Sardinian Empire, but that's really all there is to them. Even the intro with Hood and Prince Eugen and Bismarck can be roped into this as well. However, the event that follows this one, Scherzo of Iron and Blood, is where things get a bit more interesting. As many of us know, this event occurs after the introduction scene of the game. Bismarck and Prince Eugen are doing their best to escape the Royal Navy, especially after what Bismarck did to Hood. They are tailed by Suffolk and Northfolk for a bit before Prince Eugen manages to scare them away. Bismarck then tells Prince to continue on with the mission, as Bismarck's damages are going to require her to head back and repair. Reluctantly, Prince continues on the mission's objective. With Prince out of the way, Bismarck meets with a large unknown entity. This entity turns out to be one of the elite sirens under the name Observer. Canonically, this is the first event that we witness the sirens actively involved in a story's event. However, instead of attacking Bismarck, Observer informs Bismarck about the actions the Royal Navy will take, and how it will lead to the pain and suffering for the Ironblood. She speaks as if she knows what will happen to them, and with this, she offers Bismarck a choice. Observer gives her a power that she can use, and tries to reaffirm Bismarck that the Royal Navy are her enemies, not the Sirens. She argues that the Sirens hold her in high regards, which is why I gave you the key to your future. But how you use it is up to you. Whether this forbidden power leads to a bright new future for you and your comrades, or a tragic repeat of the sorrowful demise you've known before, all depends on you. With that note, she gives Bismarck a black cube and disappears. It is interesting to note here that the Sirens seem to be taking a different approach to things between the factions now. Instead of actively engaging them as enemies as they did in the past, they are doing what they can to seemingly help one side. What's more interesting is that they are seemingly aware of how these events will go down. It's possible this could be a bluff. It's possible they really do know. But what matters is why they want to use this approach. This behavior of theirs becomes more apparent as the event goes on. Now, Bismarck does engage the Royal Navy shortly after and suffers massive damage. However, before the Royal Navy is able to finish her off, the Sirens emerge and begin to engage the Royal Navy, almost as if they were protecting Bismarck. One would suspect that they are working together at this point, but Tester mentioned something interesting while fighting the Royal Navy. How terribly inconvenient it would be if you were to break our valuable specimen. The Sirens referring to Bismarck as a specimen is as if they're experimenting on her. As for what, we aren't sure, at least not yet. Tester then scolds Bismarck for not relying on the weapon and almost losing her life. Bismarck's pride and desire for glory prevents her from wanting to rely on it. She realized this after fighting Hood, that she did not want this to be an unfair advantage. I knew nothing back then, except that I had allowed the abyss to gaze back into me. Even now, that heart of darkness eats away at my wisdom cube. It plays an endless scherzo, constantly jeering at me from within my mind. It beckons me to give in to its violence. She had gazed into the abyss. Before letting it gaze back into her long enough, she realized it and stopped. She feared what she would become if she began to rely on that power. So much so that she didn't want Eugen to be around her out of fear that Bismarck would do something to her. With this, she turns her attention back at Tester and opens fire. But before much could be done, Tester executes something called the Awakening Protocol. As to what that did, we aren't sure yet. The Royal Navy re-engages with Tester, who begins to notice some anomalies in the Royal Navy themselves. Tester's curiosity gets the better of her, as the Royal Navy continued to attack her with relentless power. In the heat of battle, mist begins to form around the battlefield, reducing visibility for all. But from the mist, a ship, unleashes a beam of light at the Royal Navy, the source of which was not Tester, but Bismarck. However, Bismarck was much different this time around. Surrounding her was a ghastly black and red aura, pulsing ominously as if oozing blood. She not only looked different, but acted different as well. It was as if she had gone mad with power. But even in this berserk state, she was unable to defeat the Royal Navy. Thankfully, this fight does snap her out of that berserk state, and she uses this lull to absorb all the enemy sirens in an area and create a massive explosion. Tester notes that Bismarck has managed to somehow forcefully eject herself from the awakening protocol, shedding light onto the experiment that they were conducting on her. Despite being severely damaged from the explosion, Bismarck continues to reject the sirens. It is here where she tells the Royal Navy that she will not surrender and will fight to the death. The Royal Navy honor her by giving her the final stand that she was willing to accept. Before she is finished off though, she talks to Observer, who tells us that they have been observing humanity for thousands of years. As to why remains unknown. She does tell her that in all situations, her people do not fare well, regardless of her fate. It is here where Observer asks Bismarck if she's willing to shoulder the burden that comes as a price to save her people. Bismarck says that she would die trying, an answer which pleases Observer. I've changed my mind. Let us see you dance once more as you try to turn the cogs of fate by yourself. Use our power. Show us how you are able to reshape this world. If you are able to transcend your limitations as Bismarck and become one with your alter ego, perhaps you may find your answer. With that, Bismarck is pleased to hear that the Ironblood might be able to choose their own fate. With little energy left, Bismarck goes silent. However, a lone sub spots her underwater and charges to her quickly. It is here that a familiar face might be able to act on the promise she swore to Bismarck. One of the last parts of this event is a conversation between Tester and Observer about why Bismarck was chosen for this. Observer mentions that Bismarck's inability to be influenced outside was what made her curious. And this is precisely the kind of mind I wanted to study. One which defied all our statistical models. She could have been the key to a successful awakening, the vector that would usher forth a new future. Even with every hint she dropped, Bismarck stayed her course, even if fate did not go the way she desired. Now the Royal Navy may have won the day against Bismarck, but not every battle would go in their favor. This was shown in Z-Force with the defeat of Prince of Wales, Repulse, and Vampire. This event does go by many names: Z-Force, Efforts, Hopes, and Planning, and Strive, Wish, and Strategize. To be honest, I have no idea why it does this. However, this event did not have too much of an impact in the overall storyline. I will say though that this event does show that the Sakura Empire are now also active in the war, but it seems that they are not focused on the Royal Navy. Well, at this point, the sisters of the 1st, 2nd, and 5th fleets should have started their attack on the other side of the ocean. For those that are not sure what this means, let's refer to an event's fragment, specifically Ink-Stained Steel Sakura's 4th chapter. This cutscene shows Nagato, Akagi, and Kaga discussing plans for an attack. Akagi and Kaga mention that they know the enemy is unaware of their upcoming attack, and that it will be successful. Nagato expresses some concern towards starting another war, but realizes the situation she is in. She may hesitate, but ultimately she has no choice. The people in charge have already decided what course the future will take. We know from Crimson Echoes that Kaga is set to become the next flagship of the Sakura Empire. Akagi will also have some say as the leader, with her relation to Kaga as a half-sister. Given this, Nagato gives the order to attack Azur Lane, which brings us to a war on 2 fronts. Now, before we continue here, I do want to say that the next series of events are split between both fronts. Rather than having to switch back and forth between the 2 fronts, I've decided that I'll cover them by the theater instead. For this particular situation, I'll go ahead and cover the Europa theater first with all the European factions, then follow it up with the fights between the Eagle Union and the Sakura Empire. So with that in mind, let's continue into Chapter 3. Most of the Europa conflicts during this particular chapter are with both sides of the Irish Orthodoxy and the Royal Navy. The Ironblood does have a minor role here, but we'll dive into them later on in the storyline. For the sake of keeping things orderly, I'll quickly mention where each event is in the timeline so that we can see it at a glance. The last point I want to make is that I am terrible at pronouncing names, so don't be too surprised if I butcher a name or two. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive back in. The first event of Chapter 3 is The Way Home in the Night, which is believed to have occurred between the events of World 1 and World 2. Now, the event is a reenactment, and doesn't give much overall influence to the story other than providing context that Dunkirk is somewhat operational after the events of the first part of the Iris of Light and Dark. The same can be said for the second half of the Iris of Light and Dark, which is from Chapter 5 and on. This event is believed to have occurred between the Return of the War God and Ink-Stained Steel Sakura. The major points to take away from this, though, are that the Iris Orthodoxy's division is established at this point. It's at this time where the Iris Orthodoxy experiences its divide into the two subsections we've mentioned earlier. The Iris Libre, led by Richelieu, and the Vichy Dominion, led by Jean Bart. Both sides have different opinions on who is the bigger threat to their country. The Iris Libre places their concern on the Ironblood, while the Vichy Dominion places it on the Royal Navy and Azur Lane. It is because of this difference that the Vichy Dominion began their attack on Azur Lane forces in the area. The team, led by Massachusetts, Cleveland, and Ranger, search for the ships responsible and engage Jean Bart. One last comment comes with the showdown between Massachusetts and Jean Bart. Jean Bart, in her defeat, shows she's a bit bitter about being incomplete. However, it seems that in her last hour, she shows some regret for her own action. Perhaps the Crimson Axis thought that having another battleship would be like having a puppet. Perhaps that's what they were thinking all along. I had hoped that the power of the Sirens would allow me to assume a completed form, but in that end, that too was futile. Ironic. The country split apart because I was trying to protect it. I tried so hard to catch up to the person most dear to me that I ended up betraying her. How laughable. The person she is referring to is her sister ship Richelieu. In a way, Jean is like Kaga from Crimson Echoes, always wanting to show her strength and surpass those around her. She had someone she wanted to match or even overcome. Now that regret for betraying her sister drives her to make one last decision to right a wrong by ordering all Vichy's ships to scuttle themselves. With this, I was able to honor the pact we made with the Royal Navy in the past. To not be used by the Ironblood. To not become a hue in the Crimson Axis. But this was not the end for Jean, as we see in Skybound Oratorio that she's recovering. Before I continue any further here, I do want to quickly state that we believe Skybound Oratorio to occur after Iris of Light and Dark and right before Winter's Crown. It is also believed to be around the same time as Ink-Stained Steel Sakura. Anyway, with Jean recovering, this brings up a very good point. Just because a character is defeated in battle does not mean they die. Even if they sink, they can be saved if rescued quickly enough. This does not rule out the possibility of other methods, as we may see later on. Nonetheless, Jean is tended to by Le Terrible, so at least we know in this case. The event mostly takes place a bit away from where Jean is, as both the Royal Navy and Iris Libre are working to seize control of the Basilica. Richelieu mentions to Illustrious that the Basilica represents the legitimacy of the Iris Libre, and that would be why both sides want control over it. Richelieu's presence is also very important for this operation. I must prove if the accusations that I am a hypocrite are true or not, to my own heart, to God, and to the Vichy Dominion. One of the reasons for the split up is the belief held by Vichy Dominion that the Iris gave themselves over to a foreign power and are only puppets to Azur Lane, something they believe makes Richelieu a hypocrite. So this operation carries a lot for her. In a way, it's her validation. What's interesting is both sides have a common goal of wanting to reunite together as one faction. This goal, however, does lead them to be a bit hesitant in engaging each other. As the group makes their way to the Basilica, Richelieu continues to worry about whether the Vichy Dominion realizes the importance of the place. That thought, though, is interrupted as they are welcomed by Vichy defense fleets, some of which are upgraded. This causes Richelieu's fleet to suspect cognitive chips are in play. Richelieu herself, however, quietly suspects that the Basilica's power is actually in play instead. Now over on Algeri's side, we learn that she is aware of the secret that Richelieu hints to. However, she has not used it yet. Algeria goes to meet with Richelieu, and both try their best to convince the other to join their side. When they both fail, they retreat. Algeri is then surprised by Gascoigne, who hands her a mysterious box and some secret orders. There isn't much known about this particular scenario, but it seems that La Galicianaire believes that this is what's powering up the mass-produced fleets. She refers to it as a black thing. What is the black thing? We aren't entirely sure. With negotiations having failed, the Vichy Dominion begins their attempt to defend the fortress, with the goal of separating the Royal Navy from the Iris Libre. Valkyline is the first line of defense, and she does her best to target only Royal Navy ships, which leads to her bullying fortune. Thankfully, the Iris Libre forces realize this quickly and counter it to the best of their ability, causing Valkyline to retreat. Before any other actions can be done though, a massive beam of light shoots up to the sky from the Basilica, and slowly starts forming a dome of light. We learn from Richelieu that this is the fabled Skybound wall. However, she notes that no weapon has been found so far of it, and that this variant seems to closely resemble Ironblood tech. Richelieu then proceeds to speak of the legend of the Skybound wall. When the Skybound wall is unveiled, the next truth shall become manifest. God's light shall return everything to the flames of creation. Believing that they'll be annihilated, Richelieu's team rush their way to find an entrance inward. However, before they continue, they realize that another ambush may be lying in wait for them. They make a counterplan to protect their carriers from being completely devastated. Their intuition ends up being correct, as La Galicianaire ambushes Byrne and Illustrious. The ambush fails, and Byrne and Illustrious realize that the shield is not the work of the Divine, as the Vichy have control of who can enter through the barrier. They were also using this in the hopes that Richelieu might believe the legend would happen and act more rashly. With that trick having failed, the Galicianaire retreats, and the Vichy Dominion plans out their final stand, which didn't last long at all due to the sheer strength difference between Richelieu's group and Algeri's group. As a last resort, Algeri makes a prayer and calls upon the secret of the Basilica. As she continues praying, light forms around her and begins to explode. And then a drop of black ink fell upon the pure white world. The black dots quickly become larger, covering where she was like a thin film. What was also noticeable was that she had also seemed to have gone mad with power. Enough so that both of Algeri's allies ran from her, even listening to Richelieu's commands. This is starting to sound strikingly similar to a previous situation, right? This is later confirmed when Illustrious notes that Algeri's signal matched Bismarck's. It seems the black thing from earlier turned out to be a black cube, similar to the one given to Bismarck in Scherzo of Iron and Blood. It is here where Richelieu realizes that this is what they meant by the sacraments of the Basilica. Richelieu realizes that Algeri needs to be stopped, to which Illustrious agrees but expresses the pained concern that they might have to sink Algeri, much like how they did for Bismarck. It seems that the sacraments are tied to the Basilica, to which Richelieu suggests that the destruction of it might save Algeri. Jeanne d'Arc volunteers to keep Algeri busy while they destroy the Basilica. Thanks to her heroic efforts, the group manages to save her by leveling the Basilica. Algeri snaps out of her berserk state and realizes that she's badly injured Jeanne d'Arc. With Algeri saved, the Vichy group begins to retreat under the cover of Gascoigne. Gascogne's presence ends up startling everyone, as she is a ship that should never have existed. Richelieu sends the vanguard to chase after Algeri's group, while Gascoigne engages the rest of them. It does not take long, however, for Richelieu to hear that the vanguard is being harassed by Sakura submarines, and orders their retreat. What's interesting is the next line that comes from Gascoigne, who delivers a message to Richelieu from someone by the call sign Elegant Spy. Jean Bart has recovered. Algeri and the others will be safely sent home. The rest is up to you, my wise sister. With the message delivered, Gascoigne retreats. It is believed that the Elegant Spy is La Terrible, as Richelieu knows that she's involved to a degree. Though they are enemies, both sides still don't want to fight each other. This idea is further reinforced when we learn that Algeri tells La Terrible to inform Richelieu about Jean Bart. Now, the Sakura submarines do return to port after aiding in the retreat. However, what was interesting is that they were recording the whole situation. The reason for this is still unknown. However, Prince hands them a box as well, telling them that it is for Akagi. Is this another black cube being sent to the Sakura Empire? How many do the Ironblood have? Will Akagi end up using it? These are questions that we may not find out. But for now, it's time to go and look at what the Sakura Empire is doing. So now we're into Chapter 4, which focuses on the Eagle Union Sakura Empire conflicts a bit more. As we discussed at the end of Chapter 2, Nagato has given the all clear for the attack on Azur Lane. As to what attack this refers to, well, it's specifically found in World 1. The Eagles are finally attacked and brought fully into the Crimson Axis Azur Lane War. Akagi also makes a declaration during the attack. Today, the Sakura Empire officially joined forces with the Crimson Axis and will deliver divine punishment upon the heretics. The attack took them by complete surprise, as we can see in some of the in-game art. However, the Sakura Empire finishes their attack, and Akagi does mention that she will see the commander again. However, their reunion may not go the way she expects it to go. She may not be pleased with that when she learns about what will happen to her. Now, just like World 1, World 2, while not having a whole lot of story-impacting dialogue, brought the war closer to the Sakura Empire than they would have liked. This did have lasting consequences, as shown in a fragment from Inkstained Steel Sakura. At this time, Nagato started noticing the effect the war had on the sacred Sakura. The sacred Sakura is withering, and the people are losing faith. It is possible that the sacred Sakura blooms as part of a promise that the Sakura Empire's people make in their prayers. O sacred Sakura, in exchange for thy blessings, I offer a prayer to thee. Just and pure of heart I shall be, so that thy flowers may bloometh for eternity. This may be the reason for the withering, as Nagato did see something in Akagi and Kaga when she gave them the signal to attack. She had seen into the eyes of many. She has seen the anticipation in the eyes of faithful believers, and she has seen the gleam that signifies hope for the future. However, that is not what she's seeing in these people's eyes. Their eyes are not filled with hope, but the desire to receive her authorization to start a war. This may be foreshadowing that the Sakura Empire has made a mistake and is going down the wrong path. The question remains from here on out. Will they learn of this? Shortly after that, the Sirens are seen surrounding the place, almost seem to be protecting it. Of course, to the dismay of Mutsu. It is possible that an agreement was made with the Sirens, since they do seem to be working together. Now, Nagato mentions to Mutsu that she has relinquished her position as flagship, handing it over to Akagi and Kaga. Nagato also feels that the state of the tree is her fault, and decides to seal herself within the tree. She believes the spirits residing within the tree are trying to tell her something. As to what, we're not sure yet. Maybe it'll tell them what fate lies in store in this direction they're going. However, World 3 will show Akagi and Kaga what fate has decided for them. This chapter is well known as it led to the fall of both the 1st and 2nd carry divisions. Their defeat surprises them, and even as much as making Akagi regret. What a pity that I swore fealty to them. Otherwise, Commander, I'd like to thoroughly bully you a bit. Perhaps one day, I can escape this fate. It is uncertain who them is. It's likely the Sirens, as they seem to be working together. It's also possible she met the Crimson Axis. What's interesting too is that she mentions escaping this fate, a similar feeling held by Bismarck from Scherzo of Iron and Blood. It's possible that both of them are scared of losing those they hold dear. Akagi especially, after the loss of her sister Amagi. Now, the end of World 3 has some unknown speakers talking about souls dispersing, and the need to move their plans forward. As to who they are remains, well, unknown. Now, there are 2 more additional events, Moonlit Overture and Solomon Ranger, that we can put in this timeline, but they also have no impact on the story overall since they are reenactments, these particular reenactments being the defeat of the New Orleans class and Ryujo respectively. But those events handled, well, some of you may recall my video on Akagi at this point. It does not seem that the world is finished with Akagi and Kaga, as we could point to another fragment from Crimson Echoes. In this scene, we can see that Akagi and Kaga are talking about the fight from World 3 and being repaired. It's very likely that these two are potentially copies, as Amagi's brooch that she gave both of them is now missing. What's interesting too is the observation Kaga makes about Akagi. Even though she looks the same, her personality couldn't be more different. I've discussed before how Akagi and Kaga can be power hungry, and it's possible that their defeat at Midway might have caused Akagi to snap. This might make her more desperate, and willing to take the stance that the ends justify the means. She briefly mentions the need to discuss their plan, and also her interest in meeting her, whoever her is. In the next segment, Kaga has an interesting flashback and monologue in which she seems to express some doubt in her actions. It seems she may not be certain that she is on the right path. Now, despite her thoughts, Akagi and Tester interrupt and discuss a certain trespasser and their sanctuary. And with this, we are introduced to two new key players in the Sakura Empire's storyline, Shokaku and her sister, Zuikaku. However, the story once again splits here. Currently, there are no more events that cover the Sakura Empire and Eagle Union conflicts aside from Sundered Blue, which we aren't really sure that lines up in the timeline given the nature of the storyline it takes. As such, we'll have to cover two more splits before we can put everything back together again. Now, the first one that we'll cover here covers the Eagles and some of their Europa conflicts as well, but now there's a new twist that's been introduced to the story. The second split covers purely Sakura-related events, but also has those twists involved as well. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into Chapter 5. So as we mentioned before, it seems after the Third World, there hasn't really been any major event to cover any Sakura Empire Eagle Union conflict. However, both the Sakura Empire and Eagle Union still have major events in the storyline left. The Eagles in this chapter will make a new discovery, and that all begins with a mysterious signal from Fallen Wings. This event is believed to have taken place after Moonlit Overture and right before Return of the War God. Now, the signal leads the Eagle Union to investigate it, sending a fleet led by Washington, North Carolina, and Helena. As they close in on the signal, they find the area to be a test field for the Sirens in the area. What's disturbing is that the Sirens here have already been wiped out. As the team investigates the site, they realize that the weapons damage points to Eagle Union weaponry. They decide to investigate further into the case of their rogue party. During this time, the Sirens discuss the situation. They mentioned what seems like a codename called Keypoint G or Code G. It is here where we learn that this Code G is secretly sending the signal that drew them here in the first place, which begs the question as to why. In a later scene, we see a log recording where both Observer and seems like Enterprise are talking. This Enterprise looks drastically different from what we usually have seen, but it's later revealed by Observer that she is Code G. The conversation also mentions that Code G will continue to play along with the Sirens until she finds that person, which begs us to wonder who is that person. As Washington's party continues their investigation, they find themselves suddenly surrounded by Sirens. The situation begins to seem grim for the Eagle Union girls, as these appear to be newer models of Sirens. However, it is not long before Helena realizes the number of Sirens begins to drop drastically. On top of that, air units are showing up on their radar, but they can't identify them. It's not long before they realize who was leading those attacks against the Sirens. Code G. As Code G approaches them, they ask her to identify herself. Instead of answering their question, Code G then proceeds to ask what the name of the commander is. Both sides refuse to give an answer to the other. This prompts Code G to leave, saying that she'll figure it out herself. As she steps away, North Carolina is able to identify Code G as Enterprise. However, Code G denies it, saying that she is mistaken, and with that, leaves the area. It is unknown at this time if Code G is an ally or an enemy. There are some clear signs that she does have some ties to the Sirens in their dialogue. However, she did rescue the Eagle Union girls from being overwhelmed. So it stands to wonder whose side is she really on. There is one last bit of dialogue in this particular event that is worth mentioning. One of the scenes shows a siege is occurring at an unknown location. It's clear the defending team is losing, but they are not out of options yet. An unknown person speaks with something that looks like a siren called Lin. This siren-like character has two other names, Observer Zero and I'm going to assume Dreamweaver, not D-Arm Reaver. It is here where she is told to reactivate the Inquisitor plan. Now I will say that this name is disputed, as Cian seems to call it the Judge plan. There's also been the name Arbiter thrown around as well. Regardless of what the name is, this plan seems important, as the individual tells Observer Zero, the future, no. Humanity's past, is now in your hands. This brings up a lot of questions, especially what entails the plan that they're talking of. There's also Code G. What is her involvement in this world, and whose side is she really on? Despite all of these questions, this won't be the last time we see Code G. In fact, this brings us into Winter's Crown, which is believed to have occurred after Inkstain steals Sakura and Skybound Oratorio, but right before Ashen Simulacrum. A small Royal Navy team was returning from sending supplies to the Northern Parliament when they were suddenly attacked by Sirens. As soon as they finished the Sirens off, they are notified that another convoy was being attacked by Scharnhorst. They move to engage her despite being outmatched in sheer power. Belfast, however, does manage to distract Scharnhorst long enough for Duke of York to back her up and defeat Scharnhorst. What's interesting is that the following dialogue from Tester and Observer seems to mention that giving Scharnhorst more power didn't seem to affect the outcome. Much like Scherzo, it seems they are trying to change the outcome of the events, as if trying to change the past. When I first thought about this scene, I considered the philosophical theory of determinism. This concept basically states that the outcome of all events is determined by external factors. It's possible that Scharnhorst's defeat, not changing, suggests that there are other factors in play that still led to that particular outcome. In a way, they might have missed a piece or two that would have changed it. However, they turn their attention to the next stage of this event. They also entrust Purifier to handle the situation, and mention that if she gets in the way, Purifier can take care of her. As to who she is, we'll find out very soon. Anyway, the Royal Navy begins their plans to take down Tirpitz. However, before they can even act, a singularity forms and starts to wreak havoc in the area. Purifier appears and mentions that she finds it interesting that a singularity was to appear here, but then establishes that it is not her that made it. Little Miss Sunshine created such a massive singularity here, yet she's nowhere to be seen. So if the Sirens did not make it, then who did? It doesn't seem to discriminate as to who it damages, as the Royal Navy does suffer massive damages from it and communications are jammed. Despite this, the Royal Navy continues onward with Operation Tungsten against Tirpitz, and quickly engages her. It does not take very long for the Royal Navy to significantly weaken Tirpitz and offer her a chance to surrender. She refuses, and Victorious mentions that she's much like her sister Bismarck. Surprising to Victorious, though, Tirpitz thanks her for that information, as it tells her that Bismarck held her beliefs. To us Ironblood battleships, there's nothing more tragic than leaving your fate in the hands of others and being forgotten, having achieved nothing. This, for some reason, frustrates Victorious, as she doesn't like winning this way. She ends up retreating and leaves Tirpitz on her own. The Royal Navy then turns their attention to the Singularity, which both Duke of York and Victorious mention how it is shaped like a queen's crown. We later find that Purifier knew that Code G would be the one causing the Singularity. This must be the her they were speaking of earlier. She asks her not to do that, as it would inflict massive damage and wipe out a good chunk of the Northern Parliament if it were to collapse. This shows that Code G is not entirely with the Sirens and has her own agenda. Their conversation is cut short when the Royal Navy arrive at the scene as well. Code G then warns the Sirens not to drag uninvolved people into their experiments and stops the Singularity. Before she leaves though, Code G comments to Victorious about being an amazing warrior before disappearing. The Royal Navy, along with a very confused Victorious, then engages Purifier and successfully destroys her in the fight. With the operation concluded, the Royal Navy heads home. Something interesting to mention is that the Sirens don't seem too bothered by the results of this operation. Code G did throw a wrench into their plans, but they mentioned that their only loss was a Purifier model. Even then, that wasn't a major loss, as Purifier is later shown here in a brand new body. It seems so far a majority of the Sirens' actions are less about direct conflict with the nations, and more about testing characters. They seem very interested in changing the course of history, or at least seeing if they can. This begs the question as to what purpose do they have for doing all of this. Before that can be answered though, the Eagles are now about to have an even worse time. A small detachment led by Enterprise is out scouting the nearby waters and finds strangely that the Sirens' presence there is weaker than expected. However, they realize their communications is down and retreat quickly. They make it back out of the zones, but realize their comms are still down for some unknown reason, and that conditions have worsened into a mere sea. Worried, they get away as quickly as possible, but as soon as they get out of the Mirror Sea, they learn the terrifying news. NY City is under attack, and thus Ashen Simulacrum begins. Now, this event is believed to have occurred right after Winter's Crown and right before Swirling Cherry Blossoms. Now, while NY City is under attack, Newport Harbor also experiences an attack, which catches everybody off guard. Even more so when we realize that the enemies were not showing up on the radar. Both Newport and NY City attacks make it the largest battle to ever take place within the Eagle Union's territory. Thankfully, with the heroic efforts of Hornet, Baltimore, and Victorious against the Siren leaders, the attack on Newport Harbor was quickly resolved. However, they learned about NY's attack as well, and quickly set out to assist in the defense of it. Now, NY Harbor has some importance to the Eagle Union, as it was one of the last original bastions that humanity had against the Sirens. Its existence serves as a beacon of hope for humanity, especially those among the Eagle Union. With a war against the Sakura Empire, the Eagle Union found themselves spread out a bit thin. This might have been a major contribution to the attack on NY City in the first place. Now, during the defense of NY City, Birmingham and Juneau run into Purifier and find themselves outmatched. Thankfully, Baltimore's group manages to arrive in time to aid them both. The arrival of Baltimore excites Purifier, as things seem to be going according to their plan. The only thing missing now is the lead actors, who she doesn't name yet. Thankfully, the battle with Purifier doesn't last too long, as Juneau manages to land a vital hit against her. Back at the harbor, the carriers of Long Island, Langley, and Saratoga realize that they need to fight for air superiority to turn the tide of battle. It doesn't take them too long to gain control of the skies, but they later realize that some planes seem to be coming from an unknown source, a source that they also cannot find on the radar. Baltimore's group finally manages to reach the harbor to see the defensive fleets are holding on their own. However, they run into Tester, who was surprised to see them here a little bit earlier than expected. They engage Tester a bit, and also note planes in the sky that aren't theirs. What's odd though, is one of the comments Tester makes to Baltimore. This is not a reproduction of your history, but it is your reality. Do show me how you'd all dance, my little actors. We've known that these reproductions of their history are originally called reenactments. However, this particular instance seems to be something very different. Why deviate from this? What is it that they want in this case? As the fight finishes, Saratoga points out the direction those unknown planes come from. They make note of it for now and continue to work on the defense of NY Harbor. A bit ways away though, Koji can be seen in the middle of a Siren fleet, but this time a new unknown character joins her and mentions that the singularity is almost complete. Their conversation gives us a decent amount of questions that will take some time to answer. They also mention that their master's target is here, and Koji is also asked if she's ready to face her again. This unknown figure offers to help her when that time comes. Who has the title of their particular master, and who her is really just both unknown. The second part of this event shows the Eagles planning to assault the Sirens at their base in the Bermuda Triangle. They note that the singularity seems to be giving off similar readings to the one in Winter's Crown, but also has some noticeable differences in that the visibility is not reduced within it. As the operation begins, the team encounters Sirens, but not the type they were expecting. It wasn't humanoid ones like Purifier or Tester, but mere clones of themselves leading ships. They encounter clones of Baltimore and Hornet that then proceed to attack their own groups. Enterprise's group also has Washington and North Carolina with them, as they had encountered Koji before, and they wanted to confirm it with them when they investigate the mysterious carrier. As they approach the location, the commander begins to hear some voices speak to them. The identity of the voices is not known, but both of them conflict with each other. One is saying to draw closer while the other says to run away. The commander asks if anyone heard these voices, but learns it was only them. Enterprise does at least admit that she feels a weird sense of deja vu. Why? Well, your guess is as good as mine. As they draw even closer to the base, more voices can be heard. Two voices seem to be arguing. Voice A of them seems to be sympathetic to a group that Voice B sees as monsters. Voice B then tells Voice A that their time as a researcher is over and that they will be imprisoned. There really isn't that much that we can draw from this at the current time. Enterprise's group finally makes it through some rough weather and manages to meet with Code G. Their interrogations of Koji unfortunately produce very little, and Koji is not pleased with this encounter. As a result, the two enterprises draw their weapons at each other. You were the one person I hoped never to encounter, but in the end, you're just a lifeless puppet being controlled by Antiochus. You've even brought the key right into my hands. Antiochus? And key? More questions continue to arise, but at least we quickly learn that the key is the commander. As in, the key to what, though? That is the question we do have. Another point to probably bring up here is the key the person that Koji was looking for? Before more questions can be asked, the unknown figure from before makes her appearance. She scolds Koji for making contact with others in this timeline, and offers to hold them off. We later learn that she calls herself Ember, and Koji is also called Ash. As the group fights Ember, she says something particularly interesting. It appears her judgment was correct. This timeline, hidden out of sight by Antiochus, differs from all others we've seen. There's a lot of interesting items in this particular line. We still don't know who or what Antiochus is, but it seems that they're trying to hide this timeline away from a particular group of people. For what reason? What reason would they have to do this? This also further implies that both Koji and Ember have jumped across multiple timelines. Koji mentioned that they were looking for someone in particular in a past event, and mentioned the commander as the key. What is it she's looking to do with this particular individual? Ember is suspicious that the difference is the presence of the commander themselves, and that the attack on NY City was to force the Eagle Union and the commander to meet Ember and Koji. The team continues to engage Ember, who quickly shuts down everyone's rigging. She turns and looks at the commander, saying that they are the reason Koji suffers. Before she attempts to attack the commander though, Ember is stopped by Koji, saying that they have finished their job here and that the beacon is in place. Enterprise asks why Koji stopped Ember, to which Koji simply says, "Don't start making assumptions. I just don't want to experience that regret twice." We don't know what experience she's referring to, but it's clear that she isn't fully against the commander. They mention that the beacons are up and that they can oppose them, whoever them is. And with those last words, they both disappear, and with it, the singularity as well. We learn later in some bonus dialogues that Koji and Observer are at odds with each other. Koji vows that she will stop Observer with whatever it takes. It's clear that these two are not allies. However, in this case, the enemy of Azur Lane's enemy doesn't seem to be their friend either. But as to where their allegiance lies, it remains unclear if they are friend or foe. At least it's likely that them is the Sirens. One last dialogue shows Observer Zero mentioning that the beacons are serving as some kind of a space-time signpost to bend timelines. It seems she doesn't like that the beacon exists, and wants it either controlled or destroyed. She then assigns Arbiter, the Empress III, to take care of it. Now, this chapter did introduce a lot of new bits and pieces to the storyline, and with that, more questions as well. What is the goal of Ember and Koji? What is the commander the key to? Who or what is Antiochus? And why are they hiding this timeline from Koji and Ember? What is it that the Sirens want in this world? This timeline definitely has a lot going on already, but now, the Sakura Empire will have their turn. At the end of Chapter 4, Akagi mentions that a certain pest has snuck into their sanctuary. This brings us to the start of Visitors Dyed in Red. Now, this event occurs after World 3, and is believed to be also right before Fallen Wings. Anyway, Zuikaku and Shokaku were able to discover a key to a sanctuary thanks to Akatsuki's intel. With this, the 5th Carrier Division heads out to the sanctuary to investigate whatever scheme it is they are planning. As to who they are, we'll find out in a bit. As they arrive to the location, a storm splits their group up. An unknown voice then tells Zuikaku to get out of here, but instead, Zuikaku presses forward and manages to get through it. Unfortunately, she's alone. Rather than wait, she decides to start investigating. The ship graveyard at the entrance only boosts that creepy feeling she had about this particular area. As she explores, she runs into other Sakura Empire shipgirls. However, they weren't the same girls she knew. They didn't react as they normally did. And not to mention, they also attacked Zuikaku. She then quickly realized that they were pawns. A few voices talk about Zuikaku, and that she has taken the bait. It seems that this was a trap for them in the first place. They decide that this would be a good opportunity for them to test a new weapon that they were given. As Zuikaku continues, she runs into more pawns of her allies. However, things change when she runs into Yamashiro. Yamashiro is actually able to communicate, unlike the other pawns. Granted, she still attacks Zuikaku and is quickly defeated. Yamashiro does tell Zuikaku where Shokaku is, and also gives her a request. Please, save our future. Those girls aren't all bad. It seems something really bad is going on here, and Zuikaku is going to have to put a stop to it. One of her last encounters is with Noaki, who, much like Yamashiro, can actually talk with Zuikaku. After Zuikaku defeats her, Noaki tells Zuikaku everything she knows. They've been researching the technology their creator gave them in the hopes of turning the tide of war around. It should also be mentioned that the Sakura Empire has seen the creator as their god. However, we know that the Sirens are also helping the Sakura Empire. So, is it really their god? Or is that just a lie? Should also be noted that Zuikaku asks Noaki and Yamashiro to both assist her, but both of them say that they can't go against their will. Anyway, Zuikaku finally manages to reach her sister Shokaku, but sadly, she was a bit too late to it, as she is now a pawn. At the same time, Akagi and Kaga appear before her as well. Zuikaku chastises both of them for doing what they are doing, and even more so for doing this to her sister. Zuikaku is attacked by the Shokaku pawn. The pawn itself is not strong enough to defeat her. At this point, Kaga steps in to attack Zuikaku. But before Zuikaku could be hit by Kaga, the Shokaku pawn steps in and defends Zuikaku from danger, defying both Akagi and Kaga. This action shocks both of them, and they both note it as an awakening response. Much like how the Sirens were trying to awaken Bismarck, Akagi and Kaga seem to also be testing on how to awaken Kansen. With that discovery, Akagi and Kaga retreat to pass on the results to somebody. Zuikaku manages to finally rescue the real Shokaku, and then give chase to Akagi and Kaga. It is at this point where there is a clear difference in ideals between the carry divisions. Akagi mentions that they can wield unlimited power as long as they sacrifice souls. Akagi's lust for power has caused her to seek power by any means necessary. Zuikaku argues against her, saying, "You'll never defeat the Grey Ghost with this twisted power that you've gained from betraying your own people. Never." Zuikaku mentioning Enterprise angers Akagi into a rage. Both her and Kaga then attack Zuikaku once more. She manages to defeat both of them, but both of them mention that she does not understand the reason they are doing all of this, and then proceed to leave the area after signaling for the area's destruction. Later, both Tester and Observer receive the news about the Shokaku pawn, and do find it somewhat interesting. But they are not sure if this is the correct criteria for a true awakening. As to what that true criteria is, will be a mystery for them to solve. It is assumed that Shokaku and Zuikaku managed to escape the sanctuary. In the not too distant future, the story continues with the return of the War God, taking place after Fallen Wings, and before the second part of Iris of Light and Dark. Both Zuikaku and Shokaku find themselves to have stumbled into a mirror sea, and are intercepted by a completely different tester. This one, however, gives them a choice. Either join us and sacrifice the present and the search for evolution, preventing a future of certain doom, or reject change and proceed down the path of annihilation like you have before. This line does make me a bit curious as to if this was what was presented to Akagi and Kaga. We do know that they are working with the Sirens, so it's possible that they were given this option upon meeting the Sirens at some point in time. They could easily have played off of Akagi's fear of loss with this as well. Anyway, after this offer was given, Zuikaku rejects it and proceeds to engage Tester. This version of Tester is a lot tougher than they expected, and the situation starts to get a bit dire. Shokaku even tells Zuikaku to run while she holds Tester off, an offer that Zuikaku rejects, saying that she will never leave her side. Suddenly, Mikasa appears thanks to Shokaku's scout planes leading them to them. Mikasa mentions how hearing those words from Zuikaku pleased her, and helps to significantly damage Tester. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and admit that this particular mini-event, Return of the War God, doesn't have a lot of extra parts to the story, but it does confirm some things in the main storyline with its first chapter. To summarize the event from here, the Crane sisters returned to port safe and sound, They then celebrate Mikasa's return with a banquet and dance and spend the next day training with her, after which Mikasa later hands Zuikaku and Shokaku her flag. There is one comment in this event that I did want to share with you all. During the banquet, Mikasa asks Zuikaku, what is the most important thing you want to protect at all costs? The question proves to be a bit difficult for Zuikaku to answer, so she tries to rephrase it. I don't doubt that you would wager everything to be victorious, but what is that everything to you? In the moment you exclaim, I will fight for this world, is there a force welling up within your heart? And when you feel hopeless or in despair, is your everything not the fate of humanity in the world, but rather your friends, rivals, and celebratory moments like this banquet? To discard that everything is to disavow yourself of your being, and those who reject their very being cannot hope to ever overcome their limits. The reason I find this line so interesting is thanks to how I look at Zuikaku and Akagi. Zuikaku is willing to do everything she can to protect her everything. We saw that alone at the start where she would not leave her sister behind. Akagi, on the other hand, says that she wants to protect the Sakura Empire and its future. However, we saw in Visitors Died in Red that she's willing to sacrifice her own to receive power. She also didn't have the nicest of things to say to Zuikaku when she fought her. Does she really believe in her own words? Or has her lust for power distorted that? Anyway, it's more than likely that during this particular time, Zuikaku told Mikasa about what had happened during their time in that sanctuary. It's likely that at this time the new combined fleet was formed with Zuikaku, Shokaku, and Mikasa at the helm. However, it'll require more than just them to really get that fleet strong, which is why they might as well go rescue someone. Which leads us into Ink-Stained Steel Sakura. This event takes place after Iris of Light and Dark Part 2, and right before Witch's Crown. In this event, Shokaku, Zuikaku, and Mikasa head to the Sacred Sakura, a place that has been abandoned for quite some time. One reason they were going there is to investigate the cause as to why the Sacred Sakura is withering. This was first starting to appear when Nagato noticed it back when the war between the Sakura Empire and the Eagle Unions was started. However, there is another reason they are going here as well. They are going to rescue Nagato, as she will be needed. Mikasa knows that Nagato has more than likely been blaming herself for this particular war, and still mentions that we are going to need her to be stronger, in a way that I'm not particularly sure how. Akagi and Kaga are aware that Zuikaku's group is headed to Nagato. As annoying as it is to her, Akagi believes that it's only one battleship, so it won't be of much impact. She follows it up saying, the people's faith and her sacrifice is all just part of the plan. All we can do now is wait. We must wait until the one who can oppose the Sirens and change fate itself has arrived. I think you can really understand with that first sentence why Mikasa's line a bit back had a decent amount of impact on me. However, I wonder who this person is that she is waiting for. Is it the Key, aka the Commander? Or is it another individual like Code G? We'll not know for sure. Anyway, shortly afterwards, Zuikaku's group runs into Kawakaze, who engages them in battle as Kawakaze doesn't trust them yet. Once they defeat her, she escorts them back to Nagato and her sister Mutsu. Zuikaku and Mikasa then try to free her from the tree. As they do, a bunch of sirens show up nearby. For some reason, they decide to open fire at all of them and end up severely damaging the tree. This ends up waking Nagato, who then proceeds to level every single siren for it. Nice going. With Nagato finally awake, Zuikaku tries to convince Nagato to join their fleet. She refuses almost immediately, saying that it is her job to protect the Sacred Sakura. Mikasa, angered by Nagato's answer, lashes out at her. The history between these two is decent. Mikasa was succeeded by Nagato after all, and is definitely not pleased to see her successor in this particular state, especially since she could tell that she's never fired her guns aside from birth. It is here where Mikasa challenges Nagato to a duel. When asked why, Mikasa simply replied, "Sometimes a battle can offer more insight into a person's character than 1,000 of their words." With that battle, Nagato got to experience something she never really had. Something Mikasa believed she needed to convince herself with. Nagato then passes on to the group that she did learn something from her time within the tree. However, the spirits told me something important, that there is a divergent point in this timeline, and I want you to help me look for it. The mention of divergent point was interesting, as this would mean that the outcome of this world can be changed. The question now lies as to where in this timeline is this divergent point that she's referencing to. Thankfully, Purifier comes out of nowhere and gives us that answer by saying that it has brought all of them here in one place. She also gives one last important piece before they engage in battle. When the Winter's Crown is donned, when the steel Sakura blooms, the soul's transmigration will begin and start the final prelude. Now, I did want to make a quick note here about the mention of the Winter's Crown. It is neither the event nor the singularity mentioned in that particular event as well. The art book mentions that the Winter's Crown is a mirror sea in the North Pole region that has the shape of a queen's crown. It's possible that a Siren base or facility is located here, and also is protected by an elite Siren of some sort. However, we do know that after the Winter's Crown event, the Sirens then went to the second objective, likely meaning that the crown has been donned. Anyway, back to the storyline. With that line read off, Zuikaku's team fights and defeats Purifier. Nagato decides then at that particular point to join Zuikaku's team, but mentions one last thing about what Purifier said. She mentions that if the souls are the spirits she sees within the sacred Sakura, they are gathering in a far-off place, not within the tree. She is unsure if this is the Sirens doing, or something else. But I do know that somewhere in this world, there is a force trying to cause great change. Considering the talk about divergence points, the few times the Sirens talk about outcomes, and the offer Zuikaku was given from Tester, it does make me believe that this is what the Sirens are after. But what future are they trying to avoid? Is it the Sirens that are trying to cause a great change? Or is it someone like Koji, or even Akagi? We aren't entirely sure yet. Speaking of Akagi, the event ends with her and Kaga getting their powers, and with it they feel that they can take on Enterprise and even the Sirens. It seems now that they may no longer plan to work with the Sirens. What's also interesting is that Kaga, once again, questions if this is what they should be doing. It's likely that she is wondering how Amagi would be in this particular situation. However, this would be where things start to really pick up for the Sakura Empire even more. A bit more time passes, and we learn that the Sakura Empire is preparing for a ritual at its remote island location called the Diadem of Light. This location is said to have immense spiritual power, and that many make their way to this location for the ritual. For our particular situation, this is the Swirling Cherry Blossoms event, which occurs after Ashen Simulacrum, and before its follow-up event, Dreamwaker's Butterfly. The first of many groups we see is Akagi, Kaga, and Yamashiro making their way to the island. We learn from Akagi that this ritual has been performed before, much to Akagi's disapproval. It's a waste of human resources. It's not like they only expended their thoughts and prayers. They even used one of our catalysts. And for what purpose? A useless girl who slumbers. It wasn't obvious at first when this event came out, but this particular line actually is referring to Shinano, who she doesn't believe is actually able to be of any assistance to the Sakura Empire. Yamashiro does try to counter her argument by mentioning rumors that she has the ability to see everything that is happening in the world, rumors of which Akagi finds silly. Yamashiro provides some more light into the ritual. A divine stone from the deity Watatsumi is offered faith stored within ceremonial items, and prayers on the night of a blood moon. With this, the Sakura Empire are able to use the deity's powers to will a ship into existence, including ones that don't exist. I will say that this does make me interested into how each faction's PR ships come into existence. Were characters like Izumo, Ibuki, Kitakaze, Azuma, and Hakuryu created in this manner, or by other means? One last thing that's mentioned is that Nagato is supposed to be the host of Watatsumi. It seems that they chose someone else to take care of it. Was this by Akagi's choice, or the higher-up she complains about? They arrive shortly after, and are welcomed by Ryuho. We learn that the arrivals engage in a mock battle, which Ryuho, Akagi, and Kaga partake in. Akagi is pleased with how Ryuho performs, and compliments her on it as Ryuho leads them to the Diadem of Light. Ryuho does admit that she's surprised to see Akagi here, even calling her the de facto leader. My assumption here is that Nagato's transfer was not made public, as that did surprise Mutsu in Ink Stained Steel Sakura. Akagi believes that it's times like these that she needs to cooperate. Be it rituals, siren technology, or even the decisives, the Sakura Empire will use anything at its disposal. She's definitely not wrong about that. Will that sentiment hold true for those who oppose her within the Sakura Empire? Speaking of which, the 5th Kara Division and Mikasa arrive a bit later and are met by Tsuruga. After her defeating the mock battle, Tsuruga leads them to the islands. On their way there, Mikasa suggests to Zuikaku and Shokaku to avoid doing anything to aggravate Akagi, and that it's their best option to observe her actions and figure out her motives. The information Mikasa learned from the 5th Carrier Division troubles her. The empty pursuit of power leads to rumination, and the empty pursuit of knowledge leads one astray. A twist to this ritual is that both Prince Eugen and Z2 arrive at the location as well. This was the first time that foreign characters would be partaking in this event, and both of them are definitely curious about it. However, they leave an escape plan should Akagi's plan fail. We aren't sure what the full plan is, but it does seem that they are worried about it, and mention how the Sirens are not easily fooled. They are met by Noshiro, who, much like the previous parties, undergoes a mock battle with the group. However, things get a little bit heated thanks to Prince, and Akagi has to intervene before they kill each other. Anyway, she sends them all back to the Diadem of Light. Meanwhile, quite a bit ways away, Ember is trashing some Siren forces and their facilities, only to be met by Observer. Observer doesn't seem too bothered by it, and focuses on telling Ember about the ritual, and questions why Koji is hiding. The news of the ritual surprises Ember, and she then proceeds to the ritual. It seems that she knows something might happen about this particular ritual, and that it must be stopped. Back at the Diadem, the group holds a banquet, of which Mikasa and Akagi meet, and Prince decides to be Prince and get somewhat wasted. The festivities don't go on for much longer, as the island gets attacked by Sirens, to the surprise of many, as the place is protected by a barrier. The Sakura Empire do their best to protect the islands, but a new emergency appears as the island is consumed by a mirror sea. What's worse is that Nagato and Kawakaze are found to be caught in the middle of all of it. It's starting to look a bit dire for them, too, as Kawakaze offers to sacrifice herself to protect Nagato and give her a window of escape. This, of course, proves to be pointless as Zuikaku manages to arrive to their aid in just the nick of time. Akagi questions Mikasa as to why she didn't just ask her if she wanted to come. However, Mikasa counters this by saying that she was not aware of Nagato's plans to come here. With Nagato safe on the island, the ritual proceedings are changed up, and Nagato will take care of it. Yamashiro is still given some of the tasks, and they decide to do a rehearsal. As they prepare the necessary items, Prince says that it'd be nice if Watatsumi could help them get their Plan Z moving along, to which Akagi mentions that that could potentially be arranged. On the other side though, Shokaku tells Mikasa that she believes someone seems to have led wolves into the room, which I understand to mean that the Siren forces were led here. They suspect Akagi, but aren't sure what she's planning yet. As the rehearsal begins, Yamashiro begins to cite the verses, but is suddenly repelled by the stone. Nagato manages to arrive at this time, and calls the ceremony off, much to Akagi's displeasure. She then turns and looks at Yamashiro. That stone is enchanted to repel everything except for those from the Sakura Empire. What are you? It is here we later realize that Yamashiro isn't actually Yamashiro. As this disguise slowly disappears, Observer emerges and is quite upset that her disguise has failed. It is here where we learn that the forces outside were also led by her. Before the Sakura Empire began to engage Observer, the roof of the building was blown off by an unknown force. This gives Observer the window to disappear, and mentions how she knew Ember would come. Ember begins to make her approach, and is met by some of the defending Sakura forces, much to their own shock. The Sakura forces call her by Takao, a name she says she hasn't been called in a long time. But speaking of that name, Takao, it is just a seal of wishful thinking that humans imposed upon us. If those people were to disappear, then that name becomes meaningless. If the people willing her into existence were to be lost, what purpose does she have? Is this the source of her own pain? Did she feel that she failed to protect those that gave her meaning? Both Koji's and Ember's pasts are a mystery that is quite still unknown. I'm definitely curious for when we get to learn more about these particular two. However, while the fighting with Ember continued outside, Akagi and Mikasa exchanged some words about Akagi's goals. Akagi mentions that she is doing everything that she can for the sake of the Empire. Mikasa does not believe that, and challenges her, saying that the Sirens are using her. She fears that Akagi will turn against her own kind. Akagi then challenges Mikasa on what the right path is, expressing her desire to not break even with the Sirens. However, Nagato tells them both to shut up and work together at least for this ceremony. Before they can continue, Ember appears before them and tells them that Watatsumi is a manifestation of calamity and must be destroyed. she mentions that it will usher forth untold destruction. She also mentions that the stone does not exist in Nagato's world. Before more words are spoken, Ember destroys the object only to reveal it was a fake. Feeling her time was wasted, she leaves. With that, the ceremony is called off as the entire Sakura Empire evolves into turmoil because of the fake Watatsumi. The Ironblood representatives are about to take off before being stopped by Akagi. Akagi then asks Eugen if she could have all the information they have on the Sirens, as well as their own ships. Prinz responds saying that this kind of information comes with a price. A price Akagi is willing to pay. Watatsumi. You said you wanted to see what you could do with it, right? It appears that Akagi has fooled everyone with this Watatsumi fake. She's okay with giving it to the Ironblood. However, not everyone is convinced that the artifact didn't exist. Mikasa tells the people at the Diadem of Light that she suspects Akagi has taken it, and that she has been acting strange ever since the Reborn Confined Fleet was created. Just what is it that Akagi wants to know? The bigger question is, who will they wish into existence? Maybe we'll find out. However, a sudden event takes the Sakura Empire by surprise alongside the fake Watatsumi. Shinano has finally woken up. And this leads into my personal favorite event of the game, Dreamwaker's Butterfly. This event immediately follows Swirling Cherry Blossoms, and is believed to occur before Northern Overture and Microlayer Medley. With Shinano now awake, the Sakura Empire plans to move Shinano to the main island. Noshiro originally disagrees with this plan, but is okay with it once Shinano allows her to sail with her. As her convoy arrives, they make an offer to let Shinano rest on one of their mass-produced ships. Let me take a quick second to say this. Something that should be mentioned here is that for the next couple of bits, I'll be discussing each of her dreams that she has while the event goes on. So keep in mind that these scenarios are not all related to the current one that she's in. Now, with the first dream, we see that she wakes up on one of the ships that she was resting on in the first place, and sees another fleet in front of her. The fleet is a transport convoy fleet led by Chitose and Chiyoda. They briefly exchange some kind words before heading off on their mission. Shortly afterwards, though, Shinano's group is ambushed and learns that they've entered a mere sea. The Sirens seem to be after Shinano, and as the fight goes on, things aren't looking good for Shinano's team. They decide to directly take on Tester, but Shinano decides to take her on alone. Despite not having much experience, she tells Tester that she has fought her many times before. With that knowledge, she engages Tester and works to take her down. However, before she can succeed, Shinano is attacked by Siren submarines and loses the fight, sinking. Tester exchanges some last words before the dream ends. Reenactment concluded. I'm glad you came here, Shinano, but know this. Your actions alone will never change the fate of the Sakura Empire. Data entry complete. And upon this timeline, nothing will change. We've known in the past that the Sirens have tried to change the outcome of their reenactments, but why not this one? What reason do they have for being selective? Shortly afterwards, Shinano awakens into her second dream, Takasumi telling her that the Watatsumi ritual is underway. To her surprise, she learns that this ritual is not the same as the previous one, as Nagato is not there. Much like the last one, the Sirens begin to attack, and the Sakura Empire do their best to defend their territory. This dream seems to be further divergent of the one that we know of, as Chiyoda, Chitose, and Kashino are in this one as well. And in this particular instance, Kashino's group is trying to take the relic to a safe place, but Ember is slowly taking them out. Mikasa defends Akagi from an attack. This, of course, for some strange reason, causes Akagi to snap. In that instant, she pulls out a black cube that glows with a sinister light. In her madness, she summons its power. Shinano tries to tell Akagi to stop what she's doing. Akagi, what you hold in your hand is calamity itself. The Sakura Empire has no need for such dark power. You must discard it. We know she had this box as the submarines in Skybound Oratorio were given it at the end. We can assume how this scene unfolds, given our past experiences with it in the story with Algeri and Bismarck. In those last moments, Shinano wonders if she has the power to stop Akagi and save the Sakura Empire from the dreams of ruination that she sees all the time. However, she moves on into the third dream. Noshiro gets the attention of Shinano and tells her that they are about to assemble. In that time, we learn that they are in unfamiliar territory, as the frigid wind is finally starting to get to Shinano. We learn that the whole fleet of the Sakura Empire is about to take part in the next operation, and they will be meeting with the Eagle Union. Shinano also realizes that Key's rigging is damaged. To which she replies that they've run out of materials, and nothing can be done. Are these major powers losing their war? Are they attempting one last saving throw? It is revealed that they are fighting Antiochus, a name mentioned back in Ashen Simulacrum. But Koji mentions that they were puppets of Antiochus, so why would they be fighting it? As the fight continues, the team slowly loses contact with the other fleets. Shinano believes that they are trying to burn out the fleet. Takao reassures her that even if they did, they must protect the light of humanity. It is in this dream that Shinano suspects that this event is what led to the creation of Ember and Ash. As the fighting continues, Shinano comes across the enemy they are fighting, the Leviathan. It is also here where she notes that the dreams, as if intentionally, are not clearly revealing everything to her. She sees fragments of the truth these dreams give, but she can't make out everything about them, nor connect all of them. The fight continues onward, but the costs start to add up. After some time, Shinano was the last one standing. She mentions that one fragment is still missing in this world, and thus the fate of that world's Shinano was sealed. Before we can learn of that Shinano's fate, she wakes up into a fourth dream, where a group of destroyers are escorting her. What's interesting is that she notes the differences of this world. There's no Watatsumi, no ritual, but she exists, and honestly can't tell if she's a ship or human. But before those thoughts can continue, her group realizes that they are being followed. She also overhears a voice telling her things, but she's unsure of what its origin is. It does not take long before the submarines that followed them attack and strike her down. It is here where she realizes that this is her past not as a ship girl, but as a warship. Her final dream proves to be an interesting one. She awakens to a peaceful setting, and of course, sleepy laughy. In this dream, she learns that the factions coexist together as one. She continues to explore this dream, and realizes all the ship girls living in harmony and peace. This dream ends up being much different from others that she's had. She realizes this is a dream of a reunited Azur Lane. This world is the one that she seeks. One that avoids ruination, and in which humanity and the Sakura Empire finds salvation. However, what she doesn't expect is the next person that she runs into. Amagi. It does not take long for Amagi to realize that this Shinano is not of this world. Amagi can tell how long this Shinano has been fighting, trying to find the answers that she seeks. What matters most is not whether this is a dream or if it's a reality, but that we are here, now, and able to experience happiness. After all, even if this is but a fleeting dream, you can turn it into a reality, should you desire it. Shinano struggles to believe that she has that power, that she can make her dreams reality. Amagi takes her to lead a naval exercise. Shinano asks how they can be this way, to fight in a peaceful world. She mentions that this dream is separate from the reality she knows. Azur Lane and Crimson Axis are fighting each other. Amagi then realizes that she believes that fate lies beyond Shinano's own ability to control it, regardless of her intentions. With the exercise finished, Amagi wishes Shinano the best of luck. Shinano realizes the truth in this dream, and the power to unite our sundered world, to end the fighting. The one who can avert this future of ruin is the commander. Shinano awakens back to their original world. Here we find that things were as they were before the dreams. She is being escorted by Ki's team. Their fleet meets up with Chitose, Chiyoda, and the transport fleet. If you've already caught on to where things are already, you're probably starting to realize that this is lining up with a certain dream. Thankfully, Shinano catches on to this immediately, and mentions that the Mirror Sea is starting, much to the surprise of her fleet members. Realizing what's going on, she prays, "Give me the power to change this dream, nay, this reenactment." It did not take long for the events of her first dream to occur. The Mirror Sea forms and the enemies start to attack. However, this time, Shinano is ready. She calls out the position of each of the enemies, stopping the ambush in its tracks. She then alerts her fleet that Tester will arrive soon. When Tester appears, the dialogue starts similarly. However, Tester soon realizes a difference in the performance from what she is expecting. She believes it to be similar to a cognitive awakening, but mentions that to be improbable due to having no contact with the commander. This battle does not take long, and Tester is surprised by this result. She manages to retreat, and the Sakura Empire fleet looks to Shinano no longer as something to protect, but rather a true ally. It is here where Shinano realizes that she does have that power to change fate, and that what must be changed is not a dream, but reality itself. The last bits of this event proved to be somewhat interesting as well. The first is with Akagi telling Observer to honor their agreements and to stop messing with Shinano. Observer agrees to leave Shinano alone, but doesn't fulfill the rest of the agreement. It is here where Akagi then vows to make the Sirens pay for their actions. The final dialogue here shows a discussion between multiple Sirens, Purifier, Observer, Tester, and two new ones that we have not introduced before, Compiler and Omitter, briefly meet to discuss some plans, mostly the removal of Code G and Ember from their particular situation. They're doing this to avoid excess noise in their particular data. They also mention how Zero does not need to have the information either. One would guess that they mean Observer Zero. Observer then lets out some frustrations with Zero herself. Why does Zero prohibit observers from exchanging information across timelines? It's interesting how Zero seems to be denying the Sirens some of the things that could help them. Combine this with the fact that Antiochus was trying to hide this timeline, and it seems like both of them are trying to hide something about this world. But why? Is it because of all the anomalies of this one so far? Also, who are they hiding it from? Why do they feel the need to hide it from others? Are they protecting it? I will say that this particular bit here is mostly my own thoughts, so take these with a bit of a grain of salt. While we still have a lot of questions about everything so far, the concept of timelines and divergence points seems to be a major piece of the storyline. One of Shinano's dreams makes us aware of a doomsday scenario in which everyone was wiped out. The Sirens seem to be trying to mess with and influence this particular timeline. In the case of Bismarck and Scharnhorst, they try to change the outcome of their demise. Is this in the hopes of bringing about a new future? But if that is the case, then why are they also trying to prevent it from deviating too much with reenactments like Shinano's? At this point, we can say that they're testing events and seeing which ones can change the world. However, what is it that they are really seeking out of this? Are they trying to steer the world towards this doomsday scenario? Or are they trying to save the world from it? Shinano, in a way, is similar to them. She's trying to find the answers that lead to the path she seeks. Instead of simulations, she gets to see points in time in her dreams. Even more so, she's able to act on them if the situation works out. Koji and Ember also provide an interesting third party. It's clear that they don't like the Sirens in this timeline and are actively working against them. This comes despite us having knowledge of them having at one point been working together with the Sirens. Now, their actions cause me to think that the Sirens aren't up to anything good, especially since Koji has saved some of the Kansen in the past already. Ember has also tried to save the Sakura Empire with Watatsumi's attempted destruction. So what are their goals? We still aren't sure if they are friends or foes still even. But for us to get a better picture, we'll need to learn more about these groups, to figure out their goals and why they are acting the way they are, to understand what it is they truly seek and why they have decided to do it on this particular timeline. And with all of these questions and all these points, we move into our final chapter, Chapter 7. Alright, Chapter 7. These events, for the most part, are lore dumps. I say for the most part because there are a few that don't provide a crazy amount of lore compared to some of the others in this chapter. I will also say that we're pretty much following them in a chronological order from here on out. However, there are a few events that seem to occur at roughly the same time, so I'll make sure that I mention that for the sake of completion here. Now, we've mostly covered all the factions of Azur Lane and the Crimson Axis. There are still two factions that haven't really experienced any event of their own yet. However, this trend is about to change as we head into our first Northern Parliament event, Northern Overture. This event is believed to occur at roughly the same time as Microlayer Medley, but we'll get into that one afterwards. I will say though, Northern Overture I felt was more focused on introducing the Arctic Circle Theater and the Northern Parliament than it really did on adding to the overall lore of this universe. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and dive in. Ever since the events of Ashen Simulacrum, Azur Lane headquarters began to place a higher priority on operations against Siren bases. With this initiative, the Northern Parliament decides to request a joint operation for one of the fortresses in their area of operations. It's a bit of a surprise, as this is the first time the Northern Parliament has asked for aid outside of supplies. Nonetheless, a team led by Saratoga would rendezvous with the Northern Parliament and work to attack the fortress. The commander would also be present to support in this operation as well. As the team makes their way to the Northern Parliament, we learn that the base hasn't ever launched an attack. This behavior makes the base an extremely low priority target for Azur Lane. After some time passes, the group eventually meets with Aurora and Pamiat. After some brief introductions, the duo bring the team up to speed on the fortress. While the fortress has not engaged the Northern Parliament by their own volition, the fortress does react once anyone comes within a specific distance of them. This is further tested by Saratoga as she launches bombers that manage to make it to the fortress and drop their payloads. Unfortunately, the fortress deploys a shield to negate the damage, and then proceeds to shoot down the aircraft. This defensive stance is quite unusual, even if the Sirens aren't as aggressive as they used to be. Pamiat mentions that as they get closer and closer to the fortress, the defenses continue to grow stronger and stronger. With that intel, the team begins their assault against the fortress, and begin to encounter resistance over time. The defense forces start off rather weak, but over time, the group begins to struggle to keep toe-to-toe with the enemy defense fleets. They also know that the color of these Sirens are different as they give off a purple glow, rather than the blue or yellow they've seen in the past. They are noticeably tougher than their previous versions that they have countered before. Well, it seems like they aren't the only ones getting stronger over time. One of those newer models manages to fire a burst of flame and electricity that targets the commander. Thankfully, South Dakota, and I guess to a degree, Pamiat protected the commander from the attack. Really, it was just South Dakota though, and we'll just give Pamiat a "there was an attempt" award. The attack doesn't do a lot of damage itself, but South Dakota realizes that her radar and fire control equipment are now malfunctioning. With the discovery of this new type of Siren weaponry, the group does their best to keep their distance and attempt to outrange the enemy. Moments after the Siren is taken out, something begins to happen, and the commander passes out. Pamiat manages to wake the commander up and informs them that the team was separated by a wall of ice. The area also has become a mere sea. With their combat effectiveness drastically reduced, Aurora, Pamiat, and the commander decide to wait for the Northern Parliament reinforcements. During that time, though, the commander realizes that Pamiat and Aurora are somehow able to communicate with the reinforcements, despite being in a mere sea. This surprises the commander, but that surprise is cut short by the arrival of the Northern Parliament forces. But to the commander, something was odd about these reinforcements. Though their silhouettes are unmistakably human, their auras are anything but. They move like a majestic wave of steel. Their presence reassures the mind. The riggings they don give off an extraordinary air, one much different to that of Pamiat's or Aurora's. The weight and ruggedness of their equipment seemed to channel the biting cold of the Arctic North. An otherworldly blue light occasionally seeping out from the gaps between their black iron plates. There was something almost primal about their appearance, almost as if they were sirens. I will admit, when you look at most of the Northern Parliament and their riggings compared to Aurora and Pamiat, the difference of the rigging definitely stands out. Most factions have a general aesthetic that stands out in their rigging designs. Most of the Shipgirls of a faction end up having similar looking rigging as a result. It's interesting that this feature is made known, but all we can do is question why the difference exists. Anyway, the reinforcements, with the guidance of the commander, push back against the stronghold's defenses. We later learn that the Northern Parliament has a jamming countermeasure that allows them to communicate with each other within the mere sea. However, the technology is not perfect, and can be overpowered if the disruption is intensified. Despite that setback, the Northern Parliament eventually links up with the Eagles. With their combined might, the group manages to push deep into the fortress's area. This forces out a new elite Siren to make her entrance, Omitter. The joint force engages Omitter, and realizes that she's actively interfering with their fire control, as well as their vision, making it nearly impossible to aim. Given their current situation, the group decides to take a quantity over quality approach and starts attacking the area that she's in. This approach allows them to defeat Omitter. Omitter retreats from the area, but says that she'll be back. With Omitter gone, the Siren Fortress begins to collapse, and the mirror sea dissipates into thin air. Having completed the operation, the Eagle Union ships prepare to head home. Before they leave, though, the Northern Parliament asks the commander if they'd be willing to stay for some time. The commander, of course, agrees to stay in their care for a bit and support their operations. With that settled, the Eagle Union ships return home, with their commander staying with the Northern Parliament. Once back home, Saratoga shows Enterprise photos of the Northern Parliament's rigging. Enterprise begins to worry that they too have been using Siren technology and going against the ideals of Azur Lane. Enterprise announces that she'll be going to visit the Northern Parliament as well, and be with the commander. What the commander will soon discover is that the Arctic Circle holds more secrets within the ice and snow. However, before Saratoga's team left for the Northern Parliament, we learn of a team led by Baltimore, Helena, and Memphis that is heading to reinforce the Canal Stronghold. As they make their way there, they encounter a strange mist, which leads the group to believe that they are in a mere sea. However, they learn that they can still use their communications. As they continue further in, they end up encountering Purifier, who reveals that they had let them send communications intentionally to mess with their equipment. An interesting point here is that being in a mirror sea doesn't actually mean that comms are jammed. It seems as if that effect is actually separate from mirror sea itself. It is later revealed that they are also far away from their intended location, and have ended up in the Bermuda Triangle, thanks to having their navigation equipment messed with as well. Baltimore's group then engages Purifier, who isn't going to let them go anywhere until the stars of the show appear, whoever it is that might be. Farther away, near the Canal Stronghold, a submarine rushes back as she realizes that she needs to warn the forces there of what's going on. At the same time, at headquarters, they intercept a message from Baltimore, saying that they have encountered sirens at the Canal Stronghold. This prompts the team to make their way there to support the stronghold. Little did they know, this was a trap. And with that, the event Microlayer Medley unfolds. Now, a quick reminder that Microlayer Medley does occur around the same time as Northern Overture, which is why Saratoga mentions that she cannot join Baltimore during the mini-event Under the Mist. The team led by Bremerton, Intrepid, Casablanca, Essex, and Enterprise make their way to the Canal Stronghold. However, what's odd is that they see no signs of siren activity. Upon arriving, they are met by Cooper, Reno, Marblehead, and Bunker Hill. Realizing the amount of territory they have to cover, they all plan to split up and explore the surrounding areas. As Enterprise starts her preliminary investigation, she gets trapped in the mist. The rest of the group discusses their plans, but realizes very soon that Enterprise has not returned. They quickly mobilize and try to locate her in the nearby area. To their dismay, they notice parts that look like Enterprise's rigging scattered in the water. Before they can fully investigate, the sirens begin to attack the stronghold. While the assault is underway, Enterprise begins to explore the mist that has surrounded her. As she traverses it, she runs into Ark Royal, who mentions that she's waiting for some additional people. However, she is not responding to Enterprise's questions, and quickly disappears back into the mist. The mist also starts appearing around the Canal Stronghold area. As Enterprise continues to explore, the mist around her clears and she realizes that she is nowhere near the stronghold. Is this much the same as Baltimore's group? Does this mean that she's also now at the Bermuda Triangle? Later on, she does end up running into Ark Royal again, who mentions that some people have not yet arrived. Enterprise then proceeds to ask who else is coming, but it only is told then that they will soon see. She reaches out to grab Ark Royal, but watches as she disappears again into the mist. Enterprise is convinced that the sirens are planning something and messing with her. Meanwhile, the defense fleet hears from Cooper that there is a new mass-produced siren ship in play. They emit a purple color to them, much like the ones in the Northern Parliament Fortress. Not long after defeating these newer sirens, a massive wave rises from the mist and swallows them all whole. There's a brief moment where Purifier talks with an unknown siren. We quickly learn that our unknown siren here is playing fragments. Of what, we aren't entirely sure. However, we can see that Enterprise's suspicions were correct. Enterprise continues to traverse the mist, and runs into Ark Royal, Takao, and Hiryu discussing things. They briefly mention their dismay of the war, and then switch to other topics. Are we really going to work with those guys? Those sirens were originally created to be substitutes for us. The Consen are going to work with the sirens? For what reason? It also is made apparent that the sirens were originally created to be substitutes for the Consen. Why? What reasons would they have to justify replacing them with sirens? Now, I'm not fond of discussing future topics right now, but we do know that the four taking part in this conversation all have meta forms, though only 2 of them are currently available. Were the sirens just a placeholder while the Shipgirls were upgraded to meta forms? There's still a lot of history of the meta content that we aren't fully aware of yet, so hopefully we can learn of these things soon. Anyway, we learned from Bluegill that she was aware of the sirens and was in the middle of retreating to alert the base. Before she could reach them though, she gets surrounded by the large group of submarines that she saw. Fortunately, they were not aware of her presence at all, and she takes advantage of this and attempts to attack the flagship. Before she's able to attack it, however, the waters get rough, and she's sent away from the submarine group, but was just in time to rescue Intrepid. Back with Enterprise, the meeting that she is seeing continues as Observer appears before them. She greets them on behalf of an unknown entity called the Magister, and then gives them additional information. Laplace's demon should serve the common interest of humanity, rather than being used as an instrument of war. The Creator is in accordance. Therefore, we shall provide you a base and supply you with any resources that you may need. Make sure the research you conduct never falls into the wrong hands. Now, we aren't sure who or what the Creator or Magister are at this time. However, the mention of Laplace's demon definitely fits the time aspect of this story. Laplace's demon is an extension of determinism, which, as I've mentioned earlier, means that the outcome of an event is determined from external factors. Laplace's demon suggests that an entity that knows the state of the universe and all of its parts would be able to predict or even know the future, as it would be derived from the factors that determine it. To simplify this, if the present is the consequence of the past, and the future is the consequence of the present, then if an entity were to know everything at those times, they can accurately know what the future will be. To a degree, the Sirens act like the demons. They seem to know what's happening at that point in time. However, they do not seem to be all-knowing, as this might explain why they are trying to tinker with time in the case of Bismarck's situation, and to a degree, Scharnhorst's. However, Laplace's demon can fall apart with the concept of free will, and we've seen this once already. Much like Bismarck's case, if one that is not the demon was to know what happens during a point in time, they may try to exercise their free will to change that outcome. While Bismarck did not do so during her event, Shinano did. With Shinano taking that knowledge and using it against Tester to avoid the reenactment, this surprises Tester, who mentions it to be an anomaly. As to how much it changes things, we aren't entirely sure yet. Again, these are my suspicions, so take them with a grain of salt. Laplace's demon can possibly explain the Sirens to a degree. They might be tinkering with time and outcomes to try and become Laplace's demon. This might explain why they are speaking cryptically, as well. They might be trying to avoid creating situations like Shinano's, unless they are testing it much like they did with Bismarck. Bottom line, I think the mentioning of Laplace's demon is a decent reveal to how the Sirens operate. However, it seems that they aren't the only ones able to use this given the conversation Observer and the other ships here are having. Oh, I should make it known that Laplace's demon, the name itself, is disputed in other translations, as they prefer to call it quantum mechanics instead. So, if you see one or the other, assume those two to be interchangeable at this current time. As Hiryu, Ark Royal, Takao, and Enterprise talk with Observer, they are also told to avoid the Arbiters. Not sure specifically why, so that's a question for later. But the bigger question is, why did these four feel that they needed to work with the Sirens? What was going on at that time? Enterprise later ends up talking with an unknown voice, and is told that those were her memories, and that they are now hers. I'm going to assume that the her that this unknown voice is referring to is Code G. The voice leaves and the mist begins to disperse. Fortunately, leads Enterprise to run into Baltimore's group. Back with the defense team, the waters calm down, allowing the group to get their bearings. The mist also weakens, to which they realize that now would be a good time to go for the Mirac's core. They later run into the new Siren flagship, which turns out to be Compiler. The group manages to damage Compiler enough that it forces her to retreat. With the Siren threat gone, the defense fleet reunites with Enterprise and Baltimore's group. The bonus dialogue for this event was also interesting. The first one shows that Koji also ended up being lured into the mist as well. She ends up running into Baltimore's group and lets them know about the mist being a compound. It does seem like Koji helps them with the mist. This does show that they aren't completely enemies with Azur Lane, but why was she also lured there? We know the Sirens were wondering why she went into hiding. Is this particularly why? The other major dialogue is this last one between Observer and Compiler. We learn from them that they were testing to see if they could prevent Koji from coming to pass. Observer then mentions, the power of Koji comes from its ability to reject all foreign interference. It seems that they're trying to stop Koji from actually happening, but they weren't successful. Do they worry that she'll be a bigger issue than they'd like her to be? Also, what's interesting about this particular quote is that it does explain why Observer was fascinated in testing Bismarck and Scherzo and Iron Blood. Bismarck did not let the Sirens influence her and change her decisions. That much we know for sure. With that, the group heads back to HQ, as well as Saratoga's group for the Northern Parliament. The Eagles do inform the Royal Navy about the efforts of the Northern Parliament, much to their surprise. The Royal Navy then agrees to help escort a convoy to the Northern Parliament to deliver supplies to them. They also decide that the Royal Navy will pick up the commander as soon as they finish the escort mission. They also seem to be tracking the Ironblood's movement in the Barents Sea, and are worried about how they may impact the mission. This begins Aurora Noctis, which, honestly, I felt like it didn't really give much story at all. Anyway, as the Royal Navy begins their escort mission, they split into 3 fleets. The escort fleet, led by Eagle, Hermione, and Jamaica. The supporting fleet, led by Perseus, Vampire, and Sheffield. And the main fleet, led by Icarus, Howe, Valiant, and Edinburgh. The escort fleet notices some unusual weather, but realizes that it is helping them stay undetected. Shortly afterwards, though, an aurora appears in the sky, illuminating the world below it, and, of course, making it very easy for the Ironblood to spot them. Spoke too soon, I guess. Anyway, the fleet manages to run into U-73, who proceeds to tell them that the main fleet is on their way. The fight doesn't last very long, but they begin to wonder why a lone submarine engaged them in the first place. Was it just a messenger? Eagle begins to suspect that they were trying to separate them from their support fleet, but believes that the Ironblood shouldn't know of them yet. They later receive communications from HQ that ask them to turn and intercept the Ironblood's main fleet that they have detected. Eagle finds the order rather odd, especially since they are part of a transport fleet, and Hermione goes to double check. Further away, we learn that the wolf pack of U-101, U-81, and U-522 are waiting for the escort fleet to separate from the convoy. I guess it's obvious at this point that the communications are traps, and the Ironblood is trying to trick the Royal Navy. Prinz Eugen seems to be the one in command of this operation. We oversee a short conversation between several Ironblood members, ranging from Deutschland and Spee to even Tierpitz, Gneisenau, and Scharnhorst. At first glance, this seems like a full-out assault is about to occur. The supporting fleet for the Royal Navy picks up the presence of an Ironblood fleet with their scout planes. They realize that the fleet is heading their way, and worry about the enemy roster within the fleet. Perseus believes their communications must have been intercepted, as they should have been concealed this whole time. Back on the Ironblood side, Prinz mentions that the plan wasn't her own, but their assistant Friedrich de Gross. It's interesting to know that their PR ship now has entered the story, but I'm sure we'll have more time with her soon. What's interesting in this dialogue is that Prinz doesn't seem too concerned about the Royal Navy catching on to their plans. They also mention that they have intercepted more transmissions from the Royal Navy and plan their next message. Z2 expresses concern in whether or not the Royal Navy will actually abandon the convoy, but Prinz mentions that it's not a concern. The submarines are the wedges that will fracture this reenactment. What matters is that they will appear, not whether we can actually draw away the escort fleet. The Ironblood wants to fracture the reenactment? What benefit or reason do they have for this? And who is they? Who are they more focused on over the Royal Navy? Back with the supporting fleet though, Perseus notices that a small detachment led by Hipper is slowly making their way over. They make contact and engage in a short fight. With the air superiority from Perseus, the supporting fleet manages to get away. At the same time, Perseus notes that the Ironblood main fleet has already caught up to Hipper, which surprises them as they are moving faster than they normally would expect. Sheffield has Perseus fly closer, which ends up revealing that the fleet is actually just a bunch of decoys. Moving on to the main fleet, they continue to push forward with very little issues. During this time, however, Howe does bring up a good question about why the Northern Parliament has been so reserved about asking for help. A question that very much does seem worth asking. However, maybe we'll find out very soon. Not too long afterwards, though, they pick up a report from the supporting fleet mentioning Ironblood's main fleet is closing in on them. But that's not right. The fleet isn't actually there. Nor are they actually closing in on them. We know that communications are intercepted, and that Prinz is able to change the messages. The Ironblood aren't wanting to abide by the reenactment, so why trick the Royal Navy? This time, however, it works, and the main fleet prepares to head on out and help the support fleet. However, before they can act, they are engaged by some Sirens. We quickly learn that a small group of them broke through the Northern Parliament defense front and are headed towards the Barents Sea. This must be the group themselves that they are currently engaging. The main fleet engages the Sirens, and they find themselves in a very, very interesting situation. They can either protect the escort fleet, and the support fleet may run into trouble with the Ironblood, or help the support fleet and risk the convoy getting attacked by Sirens. They decide against the latter and attempt to reach HQ to notify them. However, they realize their comms are not working. The escort fleet also experiences some weird messages from their comms, and decide that they will be sticking with their plan and not considering those orders at all. The Wolf Pack, realizing the escort fleet isn't changing its course, begins to attack the escort fleet, and retreats as the fight really does not go well for them. The support fleet runs into Deutschland and the decoy main fleet. They quickly engage and realize that the group is using some sort of projection illusion instead. Within an instant, almost all the decoy fleet disappears. Kinda seems like it was all just one big joke in the end. Back to Prinz and Z2 though, we learn that their transmission interception tech not only listens in, but also intercepts the messages completely. They do mention that they have a limitation in that if they use it too much, it will mess with their own comms. They decide to go and attack the Royal Navy, but then abandon that plan once they learn that the Sirens are now engaging them. Prinz mentions that would be playing right into the hands of the Sirens as reenactment, and decide to retreat instead. With the Ironblood now out of the way, the Royal Navy begins to focus on the Sirens and encounter Omitter. They briefly exchange words, and then Edinburgh explains Omitter's gear to the team, and ends up angering Omitter for mentioning that the big cannon she has is really just for intimidation purposes. As the fight goes on, Hal learns Omitter's rather, predictable attack pattern and uses it against her. With the help of Valiant in distracting her, Hal manages to close the distance and delivers a fatal strike. With that out of the way, the Royal Navy finishes up the Siren threats and continues onward. The Aurora then fades and their comms come back online. We then learn that the Royal Navy installation at Scapa Flow is being attacked by the Ironblood. To make matters worse, Queen Elizabeth and Belfast are also there. With this bit of information now known, the Royal Navy forces turn and rush to Scapa Flow as quickly as possible. Now, the bonus dialogues aren't too major this time around. All of the factions hear about the attack on Scapa Flow and react to it. At Scapa Flow, however, Deutschland mentions that there's something that's been held in secret from the Ironblood. As to what, we're not entirely sure yet. Maybe a future event will let us know. Lastly, the Northern Parliament discusses the Arctic Crown, the Siren base, and their own territory. They also mention how much better their situation currently is against the Sirens. With this, they decide that it's now time to reveal what they discovered under the ice. And this leads us into our next event, Khorovod of Dawn's Rime. I probably butchered that, but hopefully I said that name right. With the help of the commander, the Northern Parliament has made considerable progress in their theater. However, they realize that they do not have much time left for the commander, as the remainder of Azur Lane is coming to pick them up. Thankfully for the Northern Parliament, the Scapa Flow engagement has slowed things down a bit, and with that, they decide to show the commander the Arcanist Sanctum. They know that the Sirens have realized why the commander is in the Northern Parliament, and are attempting to focus their attacks on the Sanctum. What is it that they are wanting to hide so much from the commander? To keep the Sirens busy, the Northern Parliament decides to perform an attack on the Crown base, to divert Omitter's attention away from the Sanctum. Curious, the commander asks about the Sanctum, and learns the Northern Parliament have been very reserved about sharing information with Azur Lane's HQ. Why the secrets? What is it the Northern Parliament is worried about? Kirov then asks the commander about how Shipgirls were made. The commander then responds by mentioning wisdom cubes came into play. Kirov then believes that this is actually a half-truth with what's been publicly released. She then states that it seems both a Shipgirl and the wisdom cubes appeared at roughly the same time. This brings forth the question as to who the first Shipgirl really is. Belarusia and Kirov both then talk about how the Sanctum is the main reason the Northern Parliament was able to recover after how badly they were struggling against the Sirens. The commander realizes at this time that this means that the Northern Parliament has been using Siren technology to restore their ranks. Belarusia defends this action. The Royal Navy and Eagle Union will never understand what it feels like to desperately struggle for air when being strangled by an overwhelmingly powerful enemy. This might explain why the riggings of the Northern Parliament look drastically different from Pomia and Aurora's rigging. It's likely this is the reason why they are so secretive and prefer to work on their own. It could be they fear that if Azur Lane learns of them using Siren technology, that they will throw them out of the alliance. As for the wisdom cubes and Shipgirls arriving at the same time, those are more questions we'll have to hope are answered. I think now is a good time to mention that this event is a huge lore bomb. There are a lot of things that we still don't know about. We can speculate and even theory craft, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to stay mostly objective. I'll still pose questions that we feel need to be answered, and try to connect the dots where I can. Hopefully, this doesn't get too confusing for everybody. Anyway, the group meets with the Sanctum defense fleet of Talon, Murmansk, and Grumkey. We learn with the attack on Crown Base, Omitter has decided to double down on attacking the Sanctum. Unfortunately for Omitter, the commander in the Northern Parliament forces then work to quickly defeat the Sirens Omitter sent to attack the Sanctum with. During this time, the group discusses Sirens a bit. According to HQ, the Sirens are more similar to machines than organic life forms. Considering they mention words like program, this does fit. They also note the overall behavior of the forces to be like bees commanded by a queen. We've had a good number of encounters where once the elite Siren like Omitter, Compiler, Tester, or Purifier is defeated, the rest of the forces, well, they fall apart. Without their leader, they cannot effectively combat their enemies and are quickly defeated. But then the question came to why make them look so human? The group proposes a few ideas from wanting to contact us in a relatable form to even being potentially products of mankind themselves. Kirov also makes us aware of Siren worshipping cults that have been allured by the Siren's forms. The group also considers the name Siren and realizes that the name itself was already circulating when most of them were in service. The commander wonders if Antiochus is actually their identity, as the Ashes have told them. With the attacking Siren forces defeated, the group begins preparations to the Sanctum. This confuses the commander, as they say it's nearby. But before much else could be revealed, a large submarine emerges from the ice. With that, we learn the Sanctum's location is underwater. The large submarine is one of the most advanced ships the Northern Parliament have. The group boards the submarine and prepares to dive. When they arrive at the destination, the commander learns that the location resembles a mirror sea that's underwater. This brings up an interesting point that Kirov makes about mirror seas. So far, the mirror seas we've encountered can be broken up into two categories. 1, arsenals for making pieces as well as mass-producing ships. And 2, experimental research facilities for creating unfathomable weapons. Comrade, what if mirror seas were not to be tools of war, but were designed to be tools of stealth and evasion? For most of our time, we've seen the Sirens use them in a more offensive way. We've had our share of it being used as other means as well, like the Sanctuary and visitors dyed in red. While the opposite may be the case for the Northern Parliament, it does make us curious as to what else could be hiding in other mirror seas. An interesting point to make for sure, and that thought, well, is a bit worrisome as to what else could be hiding in complete plain sight. Interestingly enough though, the Ironblood were interested in this technology a while back. Talon mentions that they were researching them very early on, and it's even possible the Ironblood can be using them right now. Shh, we'll get into that. This still does leave us with one question. With how well hidden this was, how did the Northern Parliament find the Arcanist Sanctum? As they continue exploring, they run into Siren security within the location. The models, however, are extremely outdated and prove to be very little of a challenge to fight on their own. On that note, the topic of Sirens re-emerges among the group. Belarusia makes an interesting remark in this case. We're almost convinced that the Sirens were not spontaneously born from these oceans in any sense of the word, but rather came from a distant place. As for their true purpose, it is not something as simple as trying to eradicate humanity. Since the very beginning, most of their actions have been aimed at driving wedges between our major factions and amplifying those conflicts, plunging us into a state of endless war. That observation definitely isn't wrong. From Bismarck's event to reenactments to even how much the Sirens and the Fox Twins work together. It'd be wrong to say that the Sirens don't have any particular involvement with the Crimson Axis. To be fair, the biggest threat to the Sirens back then was also the Alliance itself. All of the factions standing together united would definitely make things difficult for the Sirens themselves. But this leaves the question as to why they would put the factions against each other. If their goal isn't to eradicate humanity, then there's no need to divide and conquer, so why have them all fight? This conversation is interrupted once they reach a blocked gate. Now, this gate is the reason they haven't been able to learn anything else from this location. The Northern Parliament believes that Commander's high affinity to wisdom cubes might allow them to get past this gate. I do find this kind of hilarious that there is now a figurative and literal meaning to the Commander being called the key. Their assumptions do prove correct though, as the gate does respond the moment the Commander places a wisdom cube in the terminal. They later realize that behind the gate was actually a city. It seems that here, some weird phenomenon occurs, and the Commander finds themselves back in White Harbor, in the middle of a defensive hold. An unknown character is yelling at them to escape from this place. The Commander realizes the voice is familiar, but doesn't remember this person. In that case, who is it? However, the Commander later comes to and realizes that they weren't the only ones who experienced this. It appears they were all separated, but managed to regroup a bit later. Having now been fully regrouped, they all work together to explore the new area. Another dreamlike phenomenon occurs, this time introducing us to the characters named Aust and Enzil. It seems they are in the middle of evacuating the area, but it looks like they've adopted a plan. The situation does seem a bit dire, as they mention everyone has sustained heavy losses. They then proceed to mention this line: "If the light of dawn is ever extinguished, then Laplace's demon will cease to be." We've heard of Laplace's demon before in Microlayer Medley, so this might be the name of a project, technology, or ability they have. But what is the light of dawn? As the conversation continues, Ansel mentions that they'll be able to buy the rest of them more time. It sounds as if they are sacrificing themselves for the rest of the group to get away. What's also interesting is that Aust tells Ansel that they can bring their Consen with them, but wants Code G to go with Antiochus. Now, Ian does say that it's my Antiochus, but JP and CN use the there instead. So I would assume JP to be correct, as my has a lot of possible implications that we aren't sure yet. Moving on, Ansel reveals that Aust is the Magister, one of the two names we've heard from the Sirens in the past. Does this mean that Ansel is the creator? It's not specifically mentioned, so we can't be sure. Ansel also mentions that Aust did betray them, but still sees eye to eye with them. As to what Aust did, we aren't sure. Back with the Northern Parliament group though, they enter a room with some monitors. They see a record of what looks like a battle, specifically a defense. They note that it's not a worthwhile defense, but later note that it's also a facility of vital importance. As they looked more into it, the battle seems to have taken a turn for the worse, with it sounding as if many gave their lives in that battle. As they move on to other pursuits, they find a report on blueprint ships. The Commander recalls the event with Gascagnu and Skybound Oratorio, and the Northern Parliament mention Friedrich with the Ironblood. They conversed about Shipgirls, and how they assumed that a hull was considered a prerequisite for a Shipgirls construction. However, the blueprint ships never truly had a physical hull, but are able to exist. Belarusia, Soyuz, and Rozia are all examples of this alongside FTG. This causes Kirov to wonder what really makes a blueprint ship. Is it not something determined by the wisdom cubes that constitute our foundational hull? Through whatever means, the wisdom cubes already contain data that makes us who we are. To build a ship, you must extract this information. But what if there is not enough information within the wisdom cube to give form to a ship? What would happen if you edited another reality into the wisdom cubes? The interesting thing about this line of thought is in editing that information. If a ship never had a history whatsoever and is completely made up, could it be created if the information of a wisdom cube is edited? The PR system of Azur Lane is an interesting system at the very least. The ships within the group have varying degrees of existence. Some of them existed either by a true physical hull, or had its design planned but never acted on. There's also a handful of ships that just straight up do not exist at all. Yet these ships exist in Azur Lane. Now, I know, a lot of you technically know why they exist here thanks to another game, but please, try to ignore that. This conversation is extremely interesting, as it basically throws out what was believed to be the requirements needed to create a ship girl. Another flashback happens later on this time with the Commander and Aust. The only really interesting thing mentioned in it is that it seems that they are hidden well below the surface, and also are being protected by Antiochus' fleet. We still aren't sure who or what Antiochus is, but it's interesting that they are protecting in this case. Antiochus has for the most part been used with the Sirens, but that's odd if they're protecting here. I guess the other concern too is, what are they protecting the commander and Oust from? We've already had scenarios described to us of defense situations, and also doomsday situations, but we aren't entirely sure of what party is responsible. Graham manages to wake the commander up though, and alerts them that the security system has woken up. The team realizes that they are now completely surrounded. They plan out their escape, but before they could finalize a plan, another phenomena happens. In this case, all of the Northern Parliament girls have disappeared. The auditorium the commander is in has also turned on the monitors, revealing Shipgirls engaged with a new unidentified threat. They were enormous beasts made of black steel, but even through the high-resolution screens, their shapes were blurred as if light itself was repulsed by their grotesque forms. This almost sounds like these girls were fighting the Leviathans we see in Shinano's dream. But why are they fighting them? Where did they come from? To the commander though, time had stopped for a bit as they looked around. Not long after, a hologram appears, and it appears to look similar to Observer Zero. However, it denies being called a Siren. It proceeds to introduce itself as the facility's administrative program. The commander continues to ask questions to the AI, but has very little luck getting answers. The hologram informs the commander that there is no exit, and that they must fight until the last light has faded. Back with the Northern Parliament, we learn that the Sirens they are fighting off now are a lot different than they were before, even covered in some weird sort of mist. The situation starts looking bad as the group's damage starts to add up. The girls try to plan an escape for the commander, but the commander realizes that this is actually a reenactment, and that there is no escape. Or so they thought. As the battle rages on, the lights of the city slowly dim out. The commander then remembers what the hologram mentioned to him in that phenomena. Please fight until the last light has faded. Believing this is the answer, the group holds out as long as they can, and as the last light fades, everything begins to fade to black. The group later wakes up back by the original gate. Had it been a different scenario, the commander could have possibly seen this as just a dream. However, they realized that they had a small box of materials on them, and the first thing they see in the box was a document called Project Dawn. Does this refer to the light of dawn, or something else? After they collect themselves, they head back up to the surface, and are reunited with a joint fleet of Eagle Union and Royal Navy. What's interesting is that the Eagle Union and Royal Navy seem to be a little apprehensive about the commander having stayed so long in the Northern Parliament. It would be a good thing to remind everybody that what the Northern Parliament and the commander know is currently unknown to most of Azur Lane. This secrecy might be what has got them a bit concerned. Now, after some more words are exchanged, the Shipgirls prepare to take the commander back with them to HQ. There is some additional bonus dialogues here as well, the first being between Oust and Anzil, discussing cognitive awakening, and how it may require a human with a high enough attunement to wisdom cubes. We know that the commander has this requirement, so this might be why the commander is also called the Key. Another bit is between Rosia, Soyuz, and Belarusia, as they discuss the situation they now find themselves in after this event. They've used everything they can to fight the Siren threat in their homeland, but now know that the commander is a key they need for their future. The last one is between the Arbiter Empress III and Observer Zero. Empress notes that the commander had vanished multiple times with no energy fluctuations. She finds that particular situation fascinating, but is unsure what to think of this situation. Observer wonders what the commander sees, but also makes another note. A large number of variables that cannot be empirically determined have begun to converge upon a single timeline. We must handle this situation with extreme caution. The last time this type of wording was used was to describe Ash and Ember and Dreamwaker's butterfly in the Siren conversation. Does this mean more Ashes are showing up? Maybe. But little did the Sirens know, the major factions were now planning a major operation against them. The operation was called Operation Siren. During the briefing of Operation Siren, it's noted that Azur Lane should not rely on the full cooperation of the Crimson Axis. As to why, we're not entirely sure yet. Operation Siren turns out to be a large-scale counteroffensive against the Sirens in the world. HQ has noted that the Sirens have retreated to the depths of their controlled regions. At this time, it's currently unknown as to why this is exactly happening. Azur Lane HQ decides to capitalize on this particular situation, and thus Operation Siren takes place. The goal of Operation Siren is to recapture Siren-controlled territory and establish forward bases. Once all the bases are set up, a large final assault will commence. What's also interesting is the arrival of a new character for Azur Lane called TB. TB mentions that she is an identification interface, digital assistant, and navigator that will support them in this large operation. What is odd is that her appearance is strikingly similar to Observer Zero. We can't say for sure if the two are the same though, but it is an interesting observation. Now, Queen Elizabeth also does mention that TB can't pass the Turing test, which for those that aren't sure what that means, it just means that she can't pretend to be human. That said, the Eagle Union mobilizes 2 teams to establish bases on the west side of the NA Ocean, one led by Enterprise while the other is led by Essex. Starting with Enterprise's team, they mentioned that most of the Siren presence has been slowly waning save for the Siren presence in the Bermuda sector. We know from Ashen's Simulacrum that an Arbiter is there to watch over the beacon that was originally placed by Code G. Considering they haven't been too fond of their actions, this could be the Sirens trying to control the Ashes themselves. As Enterprise's team pushes into the Bermuda sector, they are met with some solid resistance. This makes Enterprise and Baltimore wonder what it is the Sirens are exactly defending here. However, it seems that they aren't the only ones in this area, as they see a good number of Sirens being slowly eliminated. These Sirens were not engaged by the Eagles themselves, so who is responsible? This prompts the team to investigate immediately, as they suspect that the Ashes are involved. Their suspicions prove correct, as they run into someone that looks like Hiryu. Hiryu questions why they are all here, thinking it's because of the Arbiters. Before she leaves, Enterprise asks Hiryu about the scene that she saw back during Microlayer Medley, when they were discussing things with the Sirens. Hiryu only responds saying, "Antiochus showed you the logs, huh?" Once again, Antiochus seems to be the Ashes' main concern. From mentioning the timeline was hidden by them to saying that the Kansan are mere puppets of Antiochus, we don't know much about this mysterious name. Aside from that, we don't get much more information out of Hiryu, and she leaves the area. She does give one piece of advice to the group though. She tells them to stay away from the Arbiters, much like how that scene in Microlayer Medley also warned Hiryu's group as well. As they continue to investigate the area, they begin to see a lot of strange anomalies. Islands that existing when they shouldn't, weird weather conditions like snow and lightning on a clear day, and an unknown mist are, well, just some of these weird phenomenons. They seem to be not the only ones here though, as Hornet detects a fleet with tier pits in the area. They also seem to be headed to the Bermuda sector, much like their own group. They attempt to get their attention by flying planes over them and eventually establish communications with the Ironblood. Enterprise asks them to retreat, but they refuse and begin to head towards them. Enterprise's team prepares for an engagement, but are then told by Saratoga that a ceasefire was agreed upon. Hornet also notes that the fleet just vanishes out of thin air. Was this another use of their hologram tech, or another anomaly created by the Sirens in the region? We aren't sure. With that weird incident out of the way, Enterprise's team finishes up their plans and establishes their base of operations for the region. With their group done, we switch to the Royal Navy's team headed by Prince of Wales, Formidable, and Warspite. Similar to Enterprise's team, the Royal Navy force encounters very little resistance early on, and note that the command structure seems absent. Without a powerful leading flagship, the Sirens easily fall apart. Where is their leadership? We know that without their leaders, the pawns are unable to make an impact in the fight. Are their leaders too distracted with another issue? Or are they trying to look weak to set a trap? After some time, the group receives a distress signal and decides to investigate it. Hood notes that no Royal Navy ships should be operating in that particular area. So this is a very weird situation for them to deal with. Grenville's team works to investigate the area quickly, but realizes that the Sirens here have been decimated as well. As the rest of the task forces arrive, they run into Atlanta and Bush. It seems they were conducting a secret mission and were somehow relocated because of that mere sea. Atlanta's team was then intercepted by a lot of Sirens, but saved by someone that looked like Ark Royal. Given that Hood mentioned no Royal Navy should be in the sector, could we assume another Ashes? Also, how did the Mirror Sea relocate them? Was it similar to Baltimore's team in Enterprise and Microlayer Medley, where their navigation was tampered with? With that issue resolved, the team returns to their original objective, and works their way towards the target area. They do encounter tougher resistance and strange anomalies as well. The anomalies aren't consistent with each zone, as this one seems to be affecting gravity. Soon they spot a very different Siren from what they're used to seeing. More concerning is that they don't seem to be able to attack that Siren at all, nor does it seem interested in attacking them as well. Warspite orders a retreat, but the Siren vanishes before they could act. With that threat gone, they engage the remaining Sirens and clear the area. With the Siren threat removed, the gravity stabilizes and they work to establish their base. Moving on to Essex's team, they begin their operations and experience a very similar outcome as well to the other two teams. Shangri-La, however, wonders if the Sirens are trying to rid themselves of their older models. If that's the case, then why? Before more could be done, TB detects a signal like Ark Royals in the region. She notes that she's being pursued by an unknown large force. Cleveland's detachment also notes that the Sirens in the area have been eradicated. Just what is it that the Ashes are doing? As the team investigates, they find an unknown crystal in one of the wrecks, and then begin experiencing radar anomalies. They receive an unknown transmission, and given that they don't trust it, they reject the signal, only for it to overrule that rejection and speak with them. The Siren calls herself an Arbiter, which causes Essex to ask if she's with the Sirens. The Arbiter responds, "Sirens? I've heard that name before, but I prefer to be known as Antiochus. I doubt that one Arbiter alone is Antiochus. It could be the whole group of Arbiters themselves. Now, does this include the Sirens we're more familiar with as well? Is Antiochus their actual name, and Siren is what humanity came up with?" She ends up giving her full identification as Arbiter, Temperance 14. What's interesting is that Essex's team ends up not fighting the Arbiter, but what looks like a servant of the Arbiter. We later see that they refer to them as enforcers. Why do the Arbiters not attack? Especially since the Ashes warned Azur Lane about them. A short dialogue takes place between the Arbiter and another possible Arbiter. They mention that they found a clue as to where Koji is. This prompts Temperance to recall the enforcer, and they leave. Essex's team, backed up by Massachusetts and South Dakota, witness the Siren just vanish into thin air. Realizing that the threat is gone, though, they proceed to set up their base and just call it there. The last group seems to be with the Sakura Empire. Akagi, Kaga, Yubari, Jinsu, and Yukikaze make their way through a neutral canal in the Mediterranean. We learn that they sent the 5th Carrier Division around the long way, as Akagi puts it, for the X Factor. Jinsu questions Akagi on her support of Operation Siren, to which she mentions that it doesn't impede them whatsoever. They also plan to use the time to investigate the Siren technology more, and get more information on the other factions as well. However, Akagi mentions that the bigger prize is the commander. The group meets with Oratorio, who then informs them that the meeting is taking place elsewhere, and that a few ships would arrive to handle negotiations. Akagi does ask Oratorio if they'd ever consider the use of Siren technology, but learns that her interest really is just in the Mediterranean Sea itself. Akagi wonders about the Siren threat in the area, but learns that a large-scale Siren invasion would be difficult as the entry points are all guarded. After some time in negotiations, the treaty is forged. Instead of staying though, Akagi mobilizes her fleet out to continue their operations. They seem to believe the Sardinians aren't too focused on this operation to be really involved. The group does make their way to Dakar and learns of the Ironblood technology that they have been developing. They are also given one of the communicators that is resistant to Mirror Sea jamming from Z2. Z2 also lets them know about the Ironblood main fleet being in the NA Ocean as well, but doesn't really know about their whereabouts specifically. Was that the hologram fleet or another fleet? Where are they now really? Anyway, Akagi's forces decide to head out and proceed with their mission. As they push through the Sirens, they encounter a very similar result as the other three groups. The enemies just seem terribly disorganized. However, it does not take long for them to start encountering a heavier resistance as they push deeper and deeper in. Akagi decides to push forward without the 5th Carrier Division. As they do, they get trapped in the fog or mist, and consider it another anomaly. Yubari also realizes their navigation is being jammed. Is this the Microlayer Medley anomalies? The group considers retreating until the rest of the force meets up with them, but it appears that Akagi has gotten separated from the group. As Akagi traverses the fog, she recognizes the area around her as Operation AF. For us, this is World 3. As she recalls the events of that operation, she curses Enterprise for what she did to her, but is suddenly spoken to by Hornet, Yorktown, and Enterprise. These versions then proceed to taunt her, telling her to come fight them if you want your revenge. Akagi swears vengeance on them and prepares to attack, but suddenly hears somebody else speak. Kaga also is trying to locate everyone else as well, but seems to also be back in her BB form. Before anything else could be done for her, Amagi appears before Kaga. This Amagi seems to be different from usual, as she says that she should have been the one by Akagi's side, not Kaga. The Samagi then says that she regrets her decision and blames Kaga for everything that has happened to the Sakura Empire. The Samagi also then begins to engage Kaga, saying that if she defeat her, she'll be able to see Akagi again. Kaga resists Samagi and attacks her, but then quickly realizes that she's attacking Zuikaku, who asks why she's attacking her in the first place. It seems the mist is showing them illusions. Or is this something else? The 5th Carrier Division's group finally manages to reconnect with Kaga, and note the illusions that everyone is seeing. However, they still need to find their remaining members. The group does manage to find Yubari, and learns that the fog has a hallucinogenic compound in it. This would definitely explain the illusions they're seeing. Jinsu is also found shortly after as well, thankfully also not attacking Zuikaku's team. However, as the team gets to Akagi, they find her attacking the empty sea while laughing maniacally. This doesn't surprise me at all. Anyway, as they watch, they notice someone else is next to Akagi. The rigging looks like a siren, but they've never seen someone like them before. However, instead of attacking Akagi, it just sits there and watches, finding the whole ordeal with Akagi hilarious. Zuikaku's team decides to engage the siren and also rescue Akagi. While fighting, the team realizes that they actually aren't hitting her. With Akagi having recovered, they find that the siren, which the game refers to as Arbiter the Hermit, has retreated. Once again, another siren has appeared to take its place and has engaged them instead. Akagi suggests that they can take this one on, but Zuikaku refuses, saying that their ammo reserves are low, and that she could feel the fog eating into their rigging. Yubari confirms this by saying that the fog also has some corrosive qualities to it. This mist is definitely a nasty one to say the least. Akagi and Zuikaku's team retreat to Dakar, and with that, the current Operation Siren story ends. I'm sure there'll be more later on, but for now, we'll have to wait. Around the same time as this event, the Ironblood offers the Sardinians the opportunity to visit one of their bases. Veneto and Oratorio both are unable to attend, unfortunately, so they decide to send Carabinieri in their stead. This leads us into the event Inverted Orthant. Inverted Orthant does take place around the same time as Operation Siren, as there are a few bits that do intersect here. Now, we switch focus to the Ironblood at a fortress installation. The installation itself has finished construction of a new facility, and will provide further training for them. Peter Stracer decides to test the new capabilities by making a training exercise out of it. There are a few minor issues that they notice occurring over time, but it doesn't seem to be too concerning at first. What is interesting about this particular location is really everything about it. The facility is an abandoned Siren base, and also has an active Mirror C generator within it. Not to mention the Shipgirls that are present here seem to not be publicly known yet. Z46 does mention though. The Ironblood has a few ships that are truly blank slates historically. It is vital that their existence is kept confidential, thus mandating the use of Mirror Cs. Talon did mention that the Ironblood was looking into Mirror Cs back in Khorovod of Dawn's Rime. Not to mention, the entire conversation around Mirror Cs has a good example of the stealth argument with this area alone. I wonder how many of the Crimson Axis know of this place, as well as the Shipgirls stationed here. Back to the issues they were facing, however, Peter begins to be a little bit concerned about those particular issues, and isn't really sure why the Siren technology is starting to act up as of now. She decides to be cautious and raises the security level of the installation. She hopes that by making certain areas off limits to their own personnel, that if somebody were to wander in, it just seemed like a normal Mirror C. However, what isn't known at this time is that Zuikaku's fleet is making their way to regroup with Akagi's team in Operation Siren. Having not known about this base's location, the group is a bit surprised when they suddenly find themselves in a Mirror C. Even more so, that their group is being attacked by Ironblood aircraft. Back at the Ironblood base though, they quickly realize that the Sakura Empire planes around them are using live ammunition. Things get stranger for them when Peter realizes there are pawns and mass-produced ships outside of their area. Suspecting an intruder, they regroup and prepare to engage the trespasser. As time goes on, the group notices more malfunctions. Peter now believes that the Sirens are directly involved with this interference. What is it that they're trying to do with this facility? Zuikaku's group continues to engage Ironblood aircraft. This, of course, confuses them as they believe Graf Zeppelin should be in Europa with Akagi. They begin to suspect Sirens are at play and that there's a facility here. And as if the timing could not have been any bit more worse, Carabinieri arrives at the base and is greeted by a handful of Ironblood. She gets a bit confused when she sees that there's no base at all. As she's brought in a little bit closer though, she learns that they have a mirror sea that is being used to hide their base here. It's not long before they get attacked by some of the pawns in the area. Prinz initially tells them that it's part of the training exercise and tells the remaining members of the group to let Carabinieri in through the back door. This would be while she would go investigate a few things going on. As the facility continues to experience issues, Peter is surprised by this as she knows that they injected software into the facility to make it safe from Siren influence. However, from Operation Siren, we know that the Sirens are capable of breaking those types of security hoops, if need be. So how could they keep things hidden from an enemy that is so technologically advanced? Peter decides at this point to have all the pawns lured into one particular area. Prinz Heinrich works to slowly accomplish that, while Weiser and Peter try to deal with the issues. Meanwhile, back with Prinz Eugen, she learns of a Sakura Empire fleet that may be in the area, which will only further complicate things, especially since they are getting attacked and doing their best to dodge the attacks. Heinrich begins to note that the pawns that she's actually engaging with are really good at dodging, only to realize that she's accidentally fired at her own allies. Eugen alerts Heinrich and the rest of the group that the comms network has gone offline. We learn that their communications can be jammed, but it's only effective at long-range communication. With the accidental blue-on-blue handled, Heinrich brings Eugen up to speed on the situation. Now, it doesn't take long for some of Eugen's group to reach Zuikaku's group. With everything having been explained, Eugen gives Zuikaku one of their custom communicators for the future. U-37 then alerts Eugen that the place is crawling with humanoid sirens, and Eugen decides to have U-37 sit at the Mirror Sea generator and do her best to remain hidden. The rest of the group work to reclaim the facility. Carabinieri, having now found out that the sirens are attempting to retake the facility, contributes to the effort and plans to protect the airfield so the sirens aren't aware they've fully lost control of it. With control of the airfields returned, Peter commences the aerial attack on all the pawns. Unfortunately, all the planes crash or lose control and waste their payloads. Eugen realizes that there is now an obstructor-type siren in the area, and that they are desperate enough to reveal one of their own in this situation. With this bit of intel known, Eugen orders U-37 to blow up the Mirror Sea generator, and this causes the sirens to lose the cover that they were working with. With the tables having been turned, Eugen confronts the lead siren in this endeavor, Compiler. Thanks to the Mirror Sea generator going down, it does not take long before the rest of the Crimson Axis forces in the area learn of her location and move to engage her. Compiler, realizing that she's been had, attempts to retreat quickly. Heinrich manages to stall Compiler the best that she can, but isn't able to put a dent into Compiler thanks to her shield. Once backup arrives though, the rest of the team works to take the shield down and attack Compiler. In a bit of desperation, Compiler submerges and tries to escape. Little did she know that U-37 was already ready to attack once she did. Compiler realizes that she can't do much to stop the attack from U-37. But before anything else happens, Purifier starts to communicate with Compiler a bit and ends up taunting her. We learn that Compiler was busy collecting a sample of something while she was stationed here. What specifically was it that they were trying to get a sample of? Some of their technology? Regardless of which, Compiler hands the mysterious sample to Purifier and explodes before U-37 could attack her. There's really not that much extra dialogues for this particular event. In fact, this event doesn't really bring too much to the table for lore, aside from really showing what the Ironblood has in terms of technology. Carabinieri does report her observations to Oratorio. Eugen then mentions that she has someone that she'd like to give the communicator to, and ends up eventually asking Friedrich about the meta ships. For now, let's go back to the Mediterranean and with the Sardinians as we go through Daedalian Hymn. We learn very quickly that a convoy has gone missing in the Aegean Sea. The convoy carried several pieces of Sardinian artwork and was escorted by the destroyer Vincenzo Gioberti. With the sudden news, Littorio and Vittorio both plan to investigate and locate the missing convoy. Since the entire fleet had gone missing, they suspect sirens are now involved. What's been particularly odd about their situation is that siren activity has been steadily increasing, unlike how things have been for Operation Siren. Vittorio and Littorio plan to head out in two individual fleets, each led by the sister ships themselves. Littorio's team heads out first and will be followed by Vittorio's team later on. As Littorio's team arrives at the Aegean Sea, they know that there's a lot of transport ships coming and going. However, no Consin seem to be escorting them. Littorio makes us aware that there's a bit of a disagreement between the Sardinian Senate and the Consul in regards to how things should be operated. It seems the Sardinian Senate is a little hesitant to rely on the Consul for most of their operations, to such an extreme degree that they may not want them to get involved at all. Vittorio did demand that one of their last convoys get at least some kind of Consul escorts. Her efforts were not entirely in vain, as the Senate finally agrees to it. Unfortunately, that convoy is the one that's currently lost at sea. As Littorio's group draws closer, they discuss the legend of the labyrinth on the Aegean Sea. But before they could discuss even more, they detect a random stray siren in the area and engage it. It doesn't take long before the group does end up in a mere sea though. Realizing that the coordinates matched with the last known location of the convoy, they can deduce that the sirens were definitely involved. Over to Vittorio's fleet though, they are making some final last-minute preparations before taking off to meet up with Littorio's group. They quickly mobilize after learning that communications with Littorio's fleet were lost at roughly the same coordinates as the convoy. As they quickly approach Crete, they realize that they do not see Littorio or her fleet in the area. Vittorio suspects that they are probably within a mere sea, and Littorio had rushed in to look into things. They had a general idea as to what mere seas do from their allies. However, this encounter would be very different from the ones that the allies have described to them. As they close in on the coordinates, a massive structure appears before them. With no knowledge of the structure, Vittorio orders Aquila to fly planes over and see what it is. However, the planes experience a weird phenomena, a wall that stops the planes dead in their tracks, but does not destroy them. Aquila mentions that she can see the labyrinth, but she can't really see much in regards to her location, as a strange haze messes with that vision. Before they could look more into it, the group runs into Tortelli and are brought to the rest of Littorio's group. Now that the full Sardinian fleet has been regrouped, the team makes their way into the labyrinth. They wonder if the sirens are trying to recreate the labyrinth of Crete. They note that there is a minotaur supposedly in the legend itself, and wonder if it would be within the labyrinth as well. With no other knowledge to go on, the group begins to investigate the innards of the labyrinth. The question as to why they would even consider such a feat remains unanswered. Were they perhaps inspired by the legend? How about the artwork that the convoy was carrying? Why that one in particular? Littorio mentions that she doesn't believe the sirens really care about the artwork. Moreover, from everything that I've heard, the sirens have chiefly been interested in upgrading the performance of their units. Now, I will admit, the sirens have always been a function over form bunch, not particularly ones that really care that much about how they look or the aesthetic of their rigging. For them to care about it now would definitely be quite uncharacteristic of them, and would make me wonder if that change has a greater role in this particular event. Littorio suggests this might be done to try and provoke their team into attacking the siren pawns, donning the Sardinian colors. Are the sirens toying with them? Speaking of sirens, just like the Northern Parliament in the past, the Sardinians bring up the topic of the origin of the name. Aberizzi doesn't believe that the sirens would give themselves that name, suggesting that it might have been humanity that did. This does make sense since one of the arbiters from Operation Siren did prefer them being called Antiochus instead, which leads to the question, is Antiochus just a formal name for them? As they continue, they run into Royal Navy pawns of Warspite, Formidable, and a few others. Knowing that these Shipgirls were in the event Imperial Tragicomedy makes me wonder if the sirens are really trying to anger the Sardinians. Anyway, considering that we have siren ships with their particular color schemes, the pawns of Shipgirls that did cause them some grief in Imperial Tragicomedy, and the missing convoy, what is it that they're trying to do with these particular actions? The Sardinians move to engage the sirens, and without much difficulty defeat them. To their surprise though, the walls of the labyrinth change, and this messes with them being able to navigate effectively. However, they note that the original way they came in was left untouched. This type of setup on the Mirror Sea and the facility makes you wonder what purpose this particular facility has. However, things begin to get weirder and weirder as time goes on. They end up running into more pawns, but it's the exact same pawns and even the exact same numbers before. Each time they continue to defeat the pawns, the walls change. Vittorio begins to wonder if this is their plan. They've exploited our tendency to rush to act, constantly giving us the illusion that we're moving forward and getting closer to our goals, without ever stopping to think what our actual goal is. What's interesting is that, in a way, this event plays off of a bit from Imperial Tragicomedy. Towards the end of the event, Observer was reading the fable of the leopard, lion, and the she-wolf. she makes an interesting observation here. The three beasts represent the Sardinian Empire's hesitation, arrogance, and envy. The Empire fled and took a different path, and climbing the mountain, they may have gained clarity of vision, but they also lost sight of their original goal. In the end, they failed to slay their beasts. Very fitting for this situation, wouldn't it be? They originally came here looking for a convoy, and ended up trying to get through the maze and defeat the Sirens. In a sense, they did forget why they were here. It is thanks to Oratorio that they even realized this to begin with, though. So that begs the question, is this the reason the facility exists? Is it to capitalize on this weakness of theirs, or to teach them to slay their beasts? Having realized this, they take a new approach to the next Siren pawns they encounter. Instead of actively engaging and destroying them, they decide to mostly ignore them. Granted, at first this doesn't work, but then they adjust the plan slightly so that way they do engage the pawns, but don't necessarily destroy or sink them. This change does pay off, and they manage to locate the convoy almost immediately after. Shortly afterward, though, they run into Tester, who reveals this to be an experiment using an incomplete reenactment. She also notes in the dialogue with them that a certain aircraft carrier from the Sakura Empire is extremely anomalous. This, more than likely, is referring to Shinano, the only one who broke out of their reenactment by defeating Tester instead of sinking. Tester then begins to engage them to test out their new EMP weaponry. Of course, while fighting Tester, the group also manages to get some aid from the missing destroyer from the convoy, as well as a Northern Parliament ally that happens to be there with them. Due to some jamming and the labyrinth's haze, hitting Tester proves to be quite difficult. Oratorio decides to have the group fire their weapons up high, in order to give Aquala's plane a window to attack. In doing so, this works perfectly, and they manage to force Tester to retreat. With Tester gone, though, the labyrinth of the Mirror Sea began to dissipate and slowly vanish. The group sends a message to HQ, but finds they aren't getting a response back. In the bonus dialogue of this particular event, we learn that a region near the Sardinian capital is under attack. Pola and Caesar attempt to hold off the enemies, and later are assisted by Friedrich. The Royal Navy and Richelieu catch wind of the attack on the Sardinian capital. Illustrious begins to wonder what they should do, especially since they were told that the Sardinians may not have the numbers to handle it. Richelieu continues to express concern about the Iron Blood, should they help. Finally, we learn that Pamiet was given a mission to deliver information. As to who or what, we aren't sure. However, our attention will divert back to the Eagles, who are about to have a very interesting encounter, leading into the last event that we currently have available to us, Mere Involution. It seems that the Eagles have noticed an increase in Siren activities near their remote base in the AF Atolls. The commander goes to investigate alongside Helena and Archerfish. When they arrive at PH Harbor, they are quickly greeted by New Jersey. The commander notes the presence of an Iowa-class battleship at the AF Atoll means the issues must be concerning enough. The commander also receives intel from Saratoga that a rather large Sakura Empire fleet is amassing near the AF Atoll base. It's a bit distant from their location, but it still concerns HQ, even if they are supposed to be on a current ceasefire agreement. Overnight though, the AF base's communications were lost, and a few signals are later picked up by Helena the next morning. Sumner specifically states that the Sakura Empire is attacking them, but the commander doesn't believe that they have a valid enough reason to attack the base. A rescue fleet is then organized with Helena, Archerfish, and San Francisco, and they quickly make their way to AF base. Shortly later, New Jersey and Ticonderoga hear of the attack and begin to really worry after communication with the commander's team is lost as well. Ticonderoga mentions reports of some sea fog appearing in the area where the comms were lost. Is this the Microlayer Medley compound again? Without much to go on, New Jersey mobilizes a team to look for the commander and also to assist the AF base. It's noted that the commander's team suddenly finds himself on the bridge of a ship. It doesn't take long for them to realize that it's some kind of Sakura Empire ship though. However, how they got there, well, they're not really sure. Helena considers the fog to be the reason. Something like this happened back when I was in Baltimore's fleet at the Canal Stronghold. When we passed through the sea fog, we were suddenly in a different place. We know that Microlayer Medley can mess with navigation systems, but this almost seems like they were teleported, especially since they are on a ship's bridge. What's even stranger is that the Shipgirls are unable to summon their riggings. This type of jamming is new, which begs the question as to why whoever did this wants them to stay there. With no other options, the group tries to find a way out, but stumble upon a functional communicator. What's all the more interesting is that the communicator seems to be relaying callouts from the Sakura Empire Shipgirls as well. With little idea what's going on, the group decides it's best not to fully trust the validity of these messages, as they may have been pre-recorded. Back at PH Harbor, New Jersey and Ticonderoga quickly speak with Baltimore and Memphis regarding the fog and are told that it's likely the sea fog works with some sort of mass displacement anomaly. While this could make sense, this doesn't explain how they lose consciousness before they're being placed on the bridge. If anything, this phenomenon has behaved closer to the one we experienced in Khorovod of Dawn's Rime. New Jersey's team is also able to communicate with Alan, who confirms the fog appeared and that they were attacked by Sakura Empire carriers, but she isn't 100% certain that it is the real Sakura Empire carriers. Is it possible that it's actually pawns at play? We know the Sirens like to drive wedges between the factions, so are they trying to weaken relations between the Sakura Empire and the Eagle Union? A question we'll have to see if it's answered later. New Jersey and Ticonderoga decide to head out and investigate the sea fog themselves. They also plan to regroup with both Boise and Morrison back at the AF Atolls. As the group works their way to the sea fog, they get attacked by some Sakura Empire planes. While there were a lot of those particular planes, they weren't really that powerful or dangerous. The poor combat effectiveness makes the group suspect that it's actually a pawn involved. They decide to tail the planes in hope of finding the ship responsible for it. Ticonderoga believes it's only a lone ship involved and suspects that it may be the one trying to trigger a reenactment, since there is a Sakura fleet nearby. It's almost as if that particular pawn is trying to frame the Sakura Empire for the actions of itself. The commander's group also comes to this conclusion as well, since Hiryu's messages start to contradict with Alan's information of AF base. As New Jersey's fleet continues to search for the lone pawn, the plane that they were tailing gets shot at by Eagle Union planes. Strangely enough, the only Eagle Union carrier in the area is Ticonderoga, so they assume that there are also Eagle Union pawns at play. So are they trying to get both sides to attack each other? Interestingly enough, New Jersey's group is contacted by Hornet on the communicator. This surprises them as they haven't been able to communicate in a mere sea before. What's even stranger is that Yorktown and Enterprise are also with her. The group knows the locations of Yorktown, Enterprise, and even Hornet, and that they are not actually here. They are all in various different locations, so this is strange that they're being reached out to by them. This might have actually been convincing if someone didn't know the whereabouts of their own allies. But for New Jersey's group in particular, it's clearly a reenactment between a bunch of pawns. But this brings the question as to why it is that pawns are doing this. Back with the commander's group though, they will continue to receive messages from Hiryu. However, this time, San Francisco decides to mess with the pawns, but are shortly reached out to by Shinano. This becomes the first time that Shinano is able to actually meet and interact with the commander. She takes advantage of this time to state that she wishes to be allies with them, and they have many things to discuss. What's odd in this situation is that in many of the dreams we saw in Dreamwakers, Shinano is physically present in them. In this case, she doesn't seem to be, but she at least mentions that she's able to project herself into this reality. This does explain how she's able to interact with them, but she also explains that she cannot act in these dreams of hers as well. Their conversation is later cut short by a Hiryu pawn stating that they will be restarting the reenactment. Shinano then gives light that this seems to be a Siren research facility, and the pawns are merely puppets. Shinano then says something interesting. Involution, a spiral that wrings out all hope from our past to serve as weapons of war. An experiment I am powerless to stop. We know the Sirens are trying to figure out ways to cognitively awaken ships, even using pawns. Is this another of their many experiments? What is it that they look to do with their findings? What goals do they have for trying to get ships to awaken? Switching back to Boise and Morrison real quick, they encounter a Hammond pawn and decide to follow it around. They also note that the Siren pawns seem to be getting stronger and stronger over time as the reenactment cycles repeat. New Jersey then attempts an experiment with this reenactment. Hornet continues to reach out and mention messages, but this time, New Jersey decides to respond to see if New Jersey and her group are, in a way, scripted to be part of the reenactment. Her tests show that it seems they weren't really intended to be a part of the experiment, as Hornet only responds with a limited range of lines. However, this situation is about to take another turn into an even weirder one. Back with the commander's group, they learn of Shinano's desire to avoid ruination. Shinano also wonders why they were brought there, and why they were trapped, but mentions that the answers may be nearby. This statement is then acknowledged by another voice. Then we are greeted by another character. However, this one looks similar to Helena. For the sake of things here, we'll go ahead and call her by her in-game name. Helena Meta then proceeds to ask the commander if they know who she is. Sadly, the commander is unable to give an answer that satisfies her. For the time being, she tells the group that she's a friend, and helps them out there by hacking. Back on New Jersey's side, they also seem to run into Helena Meta as well, to which New Jersey greets her with a warning shot. Helena Meta quickly calms them down and mentions that she plans to take them to the commander. However, they need to defeat some of the sirens chasing them beforehand. It seems Helena Meta's hacking triggered a defense system that is hunting her down specifically. New Jersey asks her to elaborate more on what she did, but she only mentions, "What I make, the sirens can also unmake. What you see is only what the sirens wish for you to see." It seems that Helena Meta has the ability to do the same things that the sirens can. Considering that she was able to hack into the Mirror Sea, I guess this kind of makes sense. As for the comment about what the sirens want them to see, also makes sense as well. They are masterful manipulators, and crafting narratives and visuals that they want the constant and the commander to see would also make sense. What kind of narrative are they hoping for them to get in this situation? It does seem like they are trying to frame the Sakura Empire for the attack. So is it to drive a wedge right back between the Sakura Empire and Eagle Union to break the ceasefire agreement? As time goes on, the commander realizes that this is a battle frozen in time, doomed to repeat the same fight over and over and over again. The question now is, for what purpose? However, they also notice that the pawns aren't responding, as if the reenactment was over. Helena Meta rendezvous with the commander and lets Shinano know that she may no longer be among them, as she plans to rewrite the very core of the Mirror Sea. With Shinano wishing them all well, Helena Meta gives her one last piece of advice and begins her work. On New Jersey's end, they witness Helena Meta tear a rift right through the fog. Helena Meta mentions that the commander is waiting for them. Ticonderoga asks if the sirens literally pulled them into another world, but Helena Meta mentions the sirens aren't capable of that. What you're seeing is a large-scale transference device, but the true nature of this place has been concealed by the sea fog, visual impairment, electronic jamming, stealth devices, and sensory interference. This is the true nature of the sea fog, a way of concealing Compiler's large-scale weapon. This fits right back into what Helena Meta mentioned in the past, but the sirens only showing what they want you to see. It seems the sea fog is capable of a lot of things that fit their manipulative abilities. That aside though, what purpose does this all have this time around? The last time Compiler did something like this was to show Enterprise memories of Code G. So what story is it that they are trying to show here? Anyway, New Jersey's group reunites with the commander's group and are reminded by Helena Meta that they still need to take out the control device first. She mentions that she kept the pawns disabled for some time, but now that the site might be threatened, they will become a part of the defense force. However, instead of the pawns becoming really strong, they end up reverting to their old weakened state. What's more concerning is that Helena Meta mentions that there is one ship guarding the Mirror Sea, and that it's one that's similar to Helena Meta herself. She mentions that it is one that has lost sight of her very existence, unlike me. One who used to fight for hope, but was overwhelmed by the grief etched into her hull by history. Is this a rogue meta ship girl? Is it possible for them to be saved? Helena mentions that what this ship goes through is the true form of the Wisdom Cube, once it has been touched by the potential of the meta phenomenon. Now we've heard meta from Eugen before, but Helena does explain it a bit. It is the course of nature for all Wisdom Cubes to undergo metamorphosis, to metastasize. It is the forbidden curse that this world has sealed within them. We don't know what exactly triggers this phenomenon, and what exactly happens during it. However, we learn that the ashes have been touched by this phenomenon, but are ones that Helena Meta states that have fallen and burned out. Is this a result of each of their regrets? Is it possible to reverse this and save them from falling? Are there two sides to these ship girls as well, or do they at least get along with each other? New Jersey asks Helena Meta why she's going out of her way to tell all of this. Helena Meta says that she can't say entirely yet, but does at least affirm that she is forever loyal to the commander. Not much else can be pried from this particular conversation, and they all decide to work together to defeat the lone ship, As the group gets closer, they realize the lone ship to be Soryu, or at least something that looks like it. She looks different though, which makes the group believe that she has experienced the meta phenomenon. What's interesting is that Helena Meta mentions that she now controls the Mirror Sea, as if to imply that Soryu has stolen it. Helena Meta does show some discomfort and mentions that it's probably too late. She then mentions that the descent into ashes is irreversible, and seems to be disheartened by the situation. She then utters Ansel and Aust's name, which causes the commander to react to it. She then mentions them to be the creator and magister respectively, but doesn't fully believe the commander knows them, as Enterprise has been quite protective of them. The group, however, finds themselves engaged by Soryu Meta, and finds themselves unable to do much to her. Helena Meta then tries to see if she can hack and weaken her, and this ends up actually working, and causes the fight to be more evenly matched. With this, the commander's group gets the edge over her and forces Soryu Meta to retreat. With that, the group ends up detecting Eagle Union aircraft, but are told by Helena Meta not to engage them as they're her planes. As the planes bomb the Mirror Sea, it manages to damage the devices and the Mirror Sea fades away. We learn that Helena Meta isn't exactly sure how Soryu took control of the sea, or why they got the commander wrapped up in all of this. It seems they all don't work in unison with each other and just kind of do their own thing. The commander quickly uses this time to ask Helena Meta more, but is told that there are a lot of things that they cannot know yet. With that said, she follows the planes into the horizon and disappears. There are some bonus dialogues to this event, the first being that Saratoga starts looking into the ashes and the meta phenomenon. At the same time, Saratoga lets us know that the ashes don't seem monolithic, as their interests seem to vary from shipgirl to shipgirl. This makes sense, as Helena Meta seems to be loyal to them. However, Koji and Ember seem to not only really differentiate from Meta, but also different from each other as well. Kiryu also seems very indifferent. What exactly is their command structure, or do they all just work independently? One final note here seems to be that Saratoga is looking into something called Operation Dawn, something we last heard about from Khorovod of Dawn's Rime. There are still a lot of questions about this particular item as well. The last dialogue seems to come between Helena Meta and what we can kind of assume to be Yorktown Meta. Helena seems to be concerned that the commander and the constant are being used by the Sirens, which is interesting because Koji has once said that they were puppets to Antiochus. Yorktown and Helena Meta both begin to worry about Soryu and fear that she will be lost as well. Helena mentions that she will try her best to handle it, so this might be part of the reason Soryu Meta is with us right now. Lastly, Helena asks if Yorktown has found Enterprise yet, but is told that they have no clue where she is. It seems that they are trying to locate her just as much as the Sirens are. This begs the question as to why the Sirens are after Koji. Is it because they now see her as an enemy? Or are they trying to use her again for their goals, as Observer has mentioned before? Nonetheless, they mention that because of Koji, they are safe from the Arbiters for a while. And with that, we currently reach the end of all the lore we have. Once again, I am going to make a disclaimer and say that the following bits after here are my own thoughts, and should be taken with a huge grain of salt, as they may not come true in the end. There are a lot of questions we have from the overall story so far. There are a lot of possible guesses I can make about a lot of the scenarios, so I'll try to cover a few of them here. Antiochus feels like a good starting point in my opinion. We aren't completely sure who or what Antiochus is. A guess could be that they are the Arbiters and Observer Zero specifically. It's also likely that it could be the actual name of the Sirens themselves. Think of it like the scientific name Canis lupus versus the common name variant dog. It's likely this is the case, as we did have a lot of discussions in the last few events questioning the history of the name, and many not actually knowing where the name originated from. That all said, what is the goal of the Sirens? We aren't sure entirely still, but we know that the Observer Zero was entrusted with the future. Well, okay, the past of humanity. It seems that they are tasked with trying to save humanity from some unknown threat. It's likely that the use of Laplace's demon, or quantum mechanics since the name is disputed, is needed to find the right way to avoid this ending. My guess right now is that they're currently trying to become Laplace's demon, and trying to learn everything they can about each individual point in time. However, I feel that this is particularly flawed, and to quote Mikasa, The empty pursuit of knowledge leads one astray. We know that the Sirens are obsessed with the past, so it could be that while their goal is correct, their methods are flawed. This might be the main thing that separates the Ashes and those with the meta phenomenon from the Sirens. It's likely that both the Ashes and meta ships have the same goal as the Sirens, but unlike them, they are looking towards the present and future. This may actually explain why the timeline was hidden by Antiochus. They might be trying to hide it from the Ashes and meta ships so that they can continue to dig into the past without interruption, or as they prefer to call it, excess noise in their data. Especially since this particular timeline itself appears to be extremely unique compared to many of the others. The Leviathan itself presents another interesting situation. Is this the threat that the Sirens are trying to deal with, or is it a part of their arsenal? There is next to nothing known about this enemy. We don't know where it came from or what it wants. So this will definitely be an interesting topic as more events get added. Next, I wanted to talk about the state of the Sakura Empire. The clear divide with Mikasa, Zuikaku, and Shokaku against Akagi and Kaga will be something I believe needs to be monitored. Right now, the overall rift in the Sakura Empire is small, as it only affects a smaller group of ships. But will each side start to grow until it reaches the whole roster? Is Shinano going to join the reborn confined fleet to oppose Akagi? Kaga has been seen multiple times questioning her own actions. Will she eventually draw a line and turn on Akagi? The Sakura Empire is in a very concerning place at this time, and with a new Sakura Empire event, what will become of this rift? Definitely something to keep your eye on. Evolution also seems to play a major role in this as well. With the discussion of wisdom cubes, cognitive awakening, and the meta phenomenon, a lot of questions arise about what we really know about the concept. If the first ship girl came around the same time as the wisdom cube, then how was the ship girl created? It seems that the cognitive awakening process might also require some with a high affinity with wisdom cubes, which would explain why the commander is called the key. At the same time, there exist ship girls in situations where the commander wasn't needed for situations similar to an awakening to occur. For example, the Shokaku Pawn and Visitors Dyed in Red, and Shinano herself. What separates these two scenarios from what the Sirens assume to be the normal process of cognitive awakening? Is it emotions? If so, then why is it that our affection with the ship girls in the game also makes them stronger? What separates that from a cognitive awakening? Likewise, what triggers the meta phenomenon to occur? Is it the constant fighting and war that makes them undergo it? Is it part of their evolution? The more brutal, cruel, and unforgiving an environment is, the stronger those that survive it become. Is this the cruel fate of the Shipgirls? To be thrown into endless battle and war, to experience the loss of their friends and those that they hold dear, to wring out all hope that they have in their world. Is this the curse of the Wisdom Cube that Helena Meta speaks of? Now, many questions remain, so hopefully, this has given everybody a good idea where things are as more events continue to come out. Will we find the answers we seek and learn the truth? Will that curiosity of ours be ready to accept whatever dark truths come from the answers we yearn for? Will you, Commander, be ready for what painful discoveries we'll make in these upcoming events? Will you be able to accept how it may change your view of the Shipgirls you've come to love and cherish? Time will tell. But there's one thing that we've always known. War never changes. Alrighty, hey, if you've made it to the end of this video, first off, thanks for that. You guys have been awesome. This video project took a crazy amount of time and effort to make, so I hope it was worth the wait. That said, I could not have done this video project alone, of which I have to thank a handful of peeps in the AL lore chat, specifically Tihihaha, Retro Karma, Horse Memes, and Fox Melody. The help they provided with the script and some theories was definitely invaluable to this video being before you all now. Also, special thanks to a friend of mine, Egg, who provided a little joke clip in Chapter 2, using his own U110 model. Lastly, there was some music I did use in this video that was created by one of our own community peeps. Now, they go by Schwarz on SoundCloud, and their YouTube account goes by Seryl Kurisu. Hacked hard. Check out their music on either of those platforms, links will be in the description below. With all that out of the way, what do you guys think of the story so far? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. It's possible that it might be getting dark as more events pour in, but let's hope that's not entirely the case. with the new Sakura event, I know I'll definitely be keeping an eye on how things will be going story-wise from here on out. It still is something to chuckle at that I used to think this game had no overall story whatsoever in the beginning. But now, well, let's say my curiosity is piqued. Anyway, I hope you all did enjoy this video and that it does give you a good picture of where the story is. I'll see if I can do smaller videos for future events as well, just so that people can have a good idea of what has changed and what has not yet. That said, I'll be bringing back my usual routine of content, as this video ended up taking a lot more time and resources for me to really work on than other items at the time. I think saying this project was well into the hundreds of hours between reading event logs, writing a 60+ page script, and the audio and video work for this video definitely makes it top Waifu Lane as the biggest project I've worked on. That said, this video was still a blast to make, and I look forward to the next big project that I will be working on for sure. Now, whether you're a regular viewer or a patron supporting this channel on Patreon, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys all again very soon.